call this town council meeting to order. Looks like we have everybody attending today. We are in, for anybody who's watching, I think we've got a fairly lengthy agenda, but one that I think has got really some really interesting discussion and some interesting comments. I'm hearing a lot of people talking. Am I? We still pick up some other people.
Preliminary and call the meeting to order. This is
could you please mute your computer? Mr. Chitwood, if you can please mute your computer. Thank you.
Got it. I knew I was hearing somebody.
Yeah.
There you go.
All right. All right. Let's go ahead and get started. Because we are back to Zoom calls today, we obviously don't have the opportunity for citizens' comments. I did ask ahead of the meeting whether anybody had sent any in, and at least as of about 20 minutes ago, they hadn't. So we don't have any citizens' comments. Otherwise, I would try to address those. But if anybody, as a result of this meeting, has anything, just get it to us, and we'll try to address.
Mr. Mayor, I believe there was a citizen question from Wendy Kulik last Friday that was sent along.
There was a question she sent regarding the financial budget. I'll tell you what, I am gonna ask when we get to the item new business
B.
Item B, we can address that question. That's part of our financial department accounting policies. So Rhoda and I have talked about that question, so we can talk about it then.
Good.
So let's move to the approval of the minutes. And what I'm going to do to make this go a little faster is ask. We have 4 sets of minutes, so I'm just going to ask for a single motion to approve the minutes of the special call town council meeting of June 1st, the minutes of the town council meeting of June 2nd, the minutes of the special town council meeting of June 9th, and the minutes of the special town council meeting of June 15th. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All right, now I'll walk through each one. Did anybody have any changes, comments for the June 1st minutes?
No.
No.
No? Anybody have any comments or changes to the June 2nd minutes?
No.
Anybody to the June 9th minutes?
No.
No.
And the June 15th minutes, any changes or?
I'd like to say yes, just to have a laugh, but no.
Great. All in favor of adopting the minutes for all 4?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, they're adopted.
Aye.
Very good. Mayor's update. There are just a couple things I want to bring the group up to speed on. One of them, if you recall, at one of our last meetings when we approved the budget, that one of the concerns we had with our budget, and it had a significant impact, was the decision by the Charleston County, as they were putting their budget together, to not allocate in this coming year any of the county accommodations taxes that we would normally receive from the county to any of the municipalities. And if you recall, we estimated based on last year's funding that had an impact on the town of approximately $490,000. Just to keep everybody up to speed, probably about 2 weeks ago, the coastal communities, ourselves, Folly Beach, IOP, which are all of the towns that are generating the significant amount of those accommodations taxes, had some discussions about that approach by the county. As a result of that, we all strenuously objected to the county, the approach that they were taking. But in addition, we offered a couple alternatives that would try to at least bring back some of that funding to the town for next year. We didn't get everything that we asked for. What we had asked for was 2 things: that at least initially that they would fund at the beginning some amount, not the whole amount that we had received last year, but they would at least fund some amount of that. And then we recommended sort of a sliding formula that if their accommodations tax revenues exceeded what they budgeted during the year, because they were budgeting for a worst case scenario, that if things came in better than they expected, that some of that money would also by some formula start going back to the municipalities, so that potentially we could actually end up with the full amount of funding that we received last year. A compromise that was recommended at the county council meeting, what they did not agree to was the first dollar upfront funding. But what they did agree to was a formula that essentially results in us receiving no money if their accommodations taxes are at or below what they've budgeted. But if they come in above what they budgeted, then they will start allocating that money back to the municipalities up to whatever we received in 2019. So if I put that in some real numbers, I'm speaking from memory, but I think last year the county budgeted for about $18 million, or got about $18 million in accommodations tax that they budgeted out to the municipalities. This year they were budgeting for 10. So what will happen is if their receipts this year come in under the $10 million, we still don't get anything. But once they hit the $10 million, we will start getting a percentage of every dollar that comes into the county, up to whatever we received in 2019, which was about Stephanie, what, about $430,000? So the long and short of it is that we still are starting the year off with no money from the county, but we at least have what I think is a real reasonable potential for us receiving county accommodations taxes. If tourism hangs on for the rest of the year the way it has started out this first month, then we might have some upside surprise.
Craig,
any questions?
is the formula defined, or is it to be determined?
No, it is defined. It was approved by the county council, and it's a percentage. Essentially, there is a chart which I can provide anybody that has us, Folly, Sullivan's Island, IOP, Seabrook, Charleston, North Charleston, and a percentage which relates to what we've historically received. And of interest, just to give you an idea where we fit, we are, of all of the municipalities in Charleston County, we generate the 4th largest amount of accommodations tax.
That's good progress, Craig.
And there's a very big drop between us and between number 4 and 5 is a huge drop. So I think we're at, Stephanie, you remember, we're about 15%, I think.
Who are 1, 2, and 3 as interest, out of interest?
Charleston, Isle of Palm, and Mount Pleasant, I think.
Pleasant.
Oh, interesting. Thank you.
Yeah. Second thing I wanted to bring you up to speed on, although you drive it every day, and in the town administrator comments, Stephanie can add to this, but I think we're all happy to see that the Parkway project is nearing completion. It's we now have the turn lanes in. We've got the new bike path completed. If you see as you're going off the island, the second entrance into the Freshfields lot there is now completed. There still is a little bit more work to be done. The geogrid that's going to be added to the side of the road along certain areas, that work still needs to be completed. There's still an outstanding question, which maybe Stephanie can address later, on whether there's still one more layer or not one more layer of asphalt in the new outbound lane. But at the end of the day, that project is coming along, and finally we are really close to completion. And I don't know if Brian is on the call, but if we were in the town hall with a live meeting, I would be pointing back there and asking him to stand up and wave to the group. I do want to just for everybody, do a shout out to Brian for all of the work that he has done over the last few months in that project, and how many nights and evenings and weekends he sat up there watching them lay asphalt. So I do want to thank him for everything that's been done. Obviously, we still though have a lot to do on the other part of that project, which is the landscaping. And I know we're running a little bit behind where we want to be with getting a signed contract, but that is all at least in process. So I think the project's going good. I don't know if you all have any observations or any questions on the parkway. Go ahead and ask them.
None.
Good. I think they're doing a nice job. Yeah. I sort of had an assumption, Craig, that there was going to be another thin layer put on top of it. I might be wrong.
Yes, maybe Stephanie, when she gets to her, do you know the answer to that question, Stephanie? Is there still one more, or maybe Brian knows, is there still another layer on the outbound lane?
Brian, from my understand, there you go.
Yes.
Go ahead.
So that question got asked. Stephanie passed that along to me. That I know, Mayor, you had asked her about that, because the manholes there seem a little bit uneven on the road.
Exactly.
So yes, it was my understanding that all of the asphalt was laid, but if they need to dress anything up, we still have we still should have time to be able to do that. So that's something that I'm going to pass along to their superintendent, and make sure that we can get that smoothed out, and that outbound lane. Okay,
that does need to get done, because it's not just me that notices it. Otherwise it would get ignored. But I've gotten actually a couple people, as they're starting to drive over it, are going, hey, that asphalt cover is sitting up a couple inches, or sitting up, it looks like about a 3/4 of an inch or an inch. So
it
but
needs to just get
the project
a little bit.
The project looks great, and Brian, thanks for all your work.
Well, I'm happy to do it. Glad to be a part. Thank you.
The last thing I just want to comment on quickly, just because it wouldn't in the last few months be a town council meeting without talking about it, is COVID. And just a little feedback over the weekend. We've of course passed the face covering ordinance last week. The sense that I have, and of course you all are on the island also, except for Klaus. So if you see it different, let me know. But so far, the sense that I have is that the compliance with our face mask ordinance has been really, really good. Any trip to fresh fields, it appears to be really a high level of compliance. Certainly inside of all of the businesses at fresh fields, but not only that, I mean, the fact is probably most of the people you see walking around have got one. If it's not on, it's clear that they've got it and they've been using it. I don't think we've had, I've seen the same thing at some of the other locations, the general store and so on. People are using it. It appears that all of our business owners have posted and are requiring the use. So I don't know whether code compliance has issued any tickets at all, but I would be really surprised, because my sense is that people are really complying on their own. I don't know what you all may have received, but certainly after we passed that ordinance, I didn't get any citizen feedback that we shouldn't have passed the ordinance. In fact, this is one where I didn't get anybody who disagreed with passing it. What I did get were obviously a fair number of our property owners who believe that we should have done something more significant. And in most cases, the desire would have been for us to pass an ordinance that would have required in certain circumstances the use of face coverings elsewhere on the island, such as boardwalks and other areas in close proximity, which of course we talked about, and I know Mary Ann certainly had supported. So we did get that amount of feedback. Partly as a result of that, I've had some conversations with Jimmy with the community association, and I know that there are things that they were going to look at doing in terms of trying to do some maybe added postings around some of the boardwalks and things like that to again just raise in people's consciousness that that they need to be thinking about where they are in proximity to other people and trying to keep that social distancing. And so from this point, it looks like things are going well with that. The one concern I want to raise, I think you get the numbers that we sent out. We all see the statistics that are coming in nationally and for South Carolina. I just want to read, though, a couple of yesterday's statistics. We still get the zip code numbers. It is obviously frustrating that we are unable to get Kiawah Island numbers. But I think we can all remember back in the April-May timeframe, we would get the zip code for Charleston County and our area code, the average number of cases in the prior 14 days was running between 5 and 7. Yesterday's was 204. And we've seen that if you've been following those numbers over the last 3.5 weeks, we've risen from, just consistently every day, those numbers have risen. Now, it's our zip code area takes in a lot of geography, but I think, nonetheless, we just as a community, you've got to look at those numbers. And while we may or may not know of anybody or have any more sense today than we did 3 months ago that Kiawah Island has been affected by positive cases, you've just got to assume that with that significant rise occurring every day, that we are going the wrong way. And so I would continue to ask, anybody I don't know how many people we have listening to our calls, but again, I would just continue to ask everybody to recognize that this thing at the moment has not turned. We appreciate everything that people are doing to comply with things like face masks and so on, but social distancing is still what they tell us we need to do. These numbers are still rising rapidly. And I will say, I spent a lot of time around the island over the last 4 days. And while outside people were real good, the occupancy, one of the observations I would have is the occupancy right now in some of our properties on the island are significant. They are filled with lots of people. And in some cases, it's lots of renters. In some cases, it's just families and lots of family members, but coming from a variety of locations. So let's just, again, all be careful that we're doing what it takes, because clearly this past weekend we have a lot of people. We have a lot of people filling a lot of houses, and so let's hope that a week or two we're not seeing the negative impact of that.
Yeah. Craig, can I mention one thing related to that? I had a chance to get a copy of the communication, the flyer that the town's communication staff produced and is being handed out by Kika to everybody who is a guest or renter or visitor to the island. It's very effective. It very clearly states what's expected of people. And I think my guess is a lot of the compliance relates to people getting that notice when they check in. So it's a good job.
Good. Those are the only things I wanted to comment. So with that, let's go ahead. We have a presentation, which is a status update on 2 of the projects that are a really significant part of our longer term sea level rise strategy. This is the groundwater table and Marsh vulnerability studies. Lee is with Kiawah Conservancy. Lee, you're going to do a presentation on this? And,
yes, sir.
And you all have also had the materials. I hope you all have, they're fascinating. I'm particularly fascinated with the groundwater study. So I'm looking forward to the presentation and the discussion on this. So Lee, I'm going to let you go ahead And what I would ask before you get started, because I don't know that everybody on the council knows you well. I know anybody who sits, if they sit in one of our environmental committees or something, they've had that chance, or in a Conservancy meeting. But you might want to also just take a minute and introduce yourself. And you've only been around here a while, so and then go ahead and get started.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Yeah, and absolutely, I can introduce myself. So I'm Lee Bundrick. I'm Land Preservation Coordinator at the Kiawah Conservancy. I took over Justin Core's position back in 2019. So I'm involved with a lot of research projects on the island, as well as I was doing some land management and conservation work for the Kiawah Conservancy. And I'm really glad to be here, and I'm really glad to be able to talk about these projects today and have the opportunity to share some of the results that we have from them. So I'm going to go ahead and screen share. Let's see, here we go. Let me extend that out. All right. So before I begin, I wanted to go into a quick update on what these projects are for anybody who's not familiar with them. So the Kiawah Island Town Council, y'all voted for specific changes to the comprehensive plan last year. And these changes involve some concerns outlined with sea level rise. And they're related to some environmental conditions that are occurring along the coast. And of concern within these changes are the status of the groundwater in the tidal salt marsh, which the Conservancy has proposed 2 research projects to the town to allow us to investigate further. With these 2 projects, we commissioned the help from the College of Charleston through Dr. Tim Callahan and Dr. Norm Levine, who both have had extensive experience working with these sorts of projects. The first project I'd like to report on is the groundwater study. This proposed study planned on looking into 2 specific conditions that play a role in supporting the upland vegetation on Kiawah Island. This happens to be the groundwater depth and the groundwater salinity. A shallow groundwater table fuels plant growth throughout the island, often lying only about 2 to 3 feet below the surface. And it fluctuates throughout the year based on several factors, such as forest production and precipitation. Due to Kiawah's coastal locale, there are influences from severe weather, tides, and saltwater. There's also the looming issue of sea level rise, which will contribute to these conditions over time. Of particular concern is the health of the forest, where declining conditions can lead to maritime forests transitioning into ghost forests, such as the one shown on screen. So the objectives of this study, we had several that guided our research efforts. Overall, we wanted to investigate groundwater to understand the fluctuations throughout the year. Of concern was a thin layer of freshwater atop a saltier water called the freshwater lens, and capturing these instances of saltwater intrusion that occur within these 2 interfaces. We also saw this as an opportunity to establish a long-term monitoring effort and identify areas to implement practices that might alleviate issues with stormwater runoff, as well as reduce subsurface saltwater intrusion and be able to recharge groundwater through different infrastructure practices. Our methods were pretty straightforward. It consisted of installing a series of groundwater wells based on specific soil conditions throughout the island. Mainly this was based on elevation, soil hydrologic group, and regional distribution throughout Kiawah Island. These would be installed within the first 15 feet of the surface, which would access the ecologically important groundwater surface layers. And in these wells, we would deploy monitoring equipment to gather information on salinity and depth over time. For installing the wells, we used an Camp auger boring and casing system, which is commonly used for agricultural research, which is shown on the screen. This is developed by a company out of the Netherlands, which is known for having to deal with a lot of saturated soils. And this would allow us to bore through saturated soils without actually having the borehole collapsing during the augering process. And for example, this is a picture of a dig crew standing on top of the casing system. So you would have one crew member on top, kind of pushing a baler down into the soil and kind of creating a slurry And over time, this would loosen up the soil at the bottom and then allow the casing to slowly sink. And then we would just apply another casing on top of it until we reach the bottom depth. Most of the casing equipment that we've been able to use has reached up to about 17 foot at the most, which is more than enough to access the groundwater layers that we're looking at. In this process, soil is continuously removed. Oh, one sec. Let me go back. Here, okay, sorry about that. So wells consist of a well screen that is essentially a 10-foot PVC pipe with 1/64 inch incisions along the extent, and it's attached to a normal Schedule 40 pipe that sticks above the surface. The well screen allows for groundwater to enter in the pipe and also keeps sediment out so that we can actually access the groundwater without having any contamination. Likewise, we have well plugs and locks that do the same job, that keep all of bad debris out, but it also keeps the wells from being tampered with in the future. Monitoring was organized so that we would gather a breadth of data over time and space. And this involved a lot of equipment that we've acquired over the set of the last 6 months. We obtained a spooled probe that allows us to take point measurements of temperature, level, and conductivity when physically visiting the wells. And recently, we've also acquired monitoring probes called level loggers, which allows to continuously collect data without researchers actually being present at the sites every time. And these are planned on being deployed within the near future. And now I'll get into some of the current conditions and preliminary results that we're seeing within these wells after we establish them. So what we have, there it is. Okay, sorry, I think they're skipping a little bit. Currently we have about 15 monitoring wells established throughout Kiawah Island. These are noted by the line green dots that you see on the screen. There are also a set of proposed well sites for future installation on private lands, which are noted by blue. These are still in arrangements needed for installation, but about half of them are already ready for install. It's just a matter of getting permission and so forth. Back in mid-March, we actually had to put a hiatus on installing some of the wells due to coronavirus issues. And since we have to have a crew involved, a crew of 2 to 4 people involved with installing the wells, the close quarters of the installation process was too much of an issue at the time. So we waited until conditions were right. Recently, we were able to reestablish one well at 227 Sea Marsh. So we're getting back into the groove of things of installing the wells, but we still have proposed wells that we're currently in discussions with and getting planned to install. For the most part, when we're digging, we're taking notes of the different things that we're seeing within the soil, all the characteristics such as soil texture, soil color, as well as some interesting things that we're finding in the soil, such as the shell hash and larger shells. For the most part, we're seeing the same observations that were taken from 1980 from a doctoral dissertation by Tom Maslow. The soil horizons follow a similar composition as the beach that you would see on Kiawah Island shoreline right now. So the soil at the top is similar to what you would see at the dune infrastructure, and then it kind of follows along until the lower shore face into the water. And it has similar soil consistency. So at the top, you have more coarse soils. Then at the bottom, you would have a lot more finer grain soils. And it kind of acts like a non-Newtonian fluid. If you ever mix cornstarch together with water, it's about that same consistency. It's dry whenever you don't touch it, but whenever you apply some pressure and move it around, it releases some water. It's very interesting. And then often when we get to areas lower into the soil, sometimes around 9 to 13 feet, we would definitely encounter a lot of shell hash from that's what used to be where ancient shorelines existed. And these have smaller instances, and some are big, such as the one on screen. And a handful of times, especially in the northern portions of the island near Kiawah Island Parkway near the gate, and out near Rhett's Bluff, we've encountered a clay layer about 9 to 13 feet deep. And these are remnants of an ancient marsh that existed in Kiawah several millennia ago. Once the wells are established and flushed, we collect data and put them into a Excel graph so we can analyze this and get some good information out of it. Shown here are the data from 2 wells taken at the same date. Highlighted in the red boxes are the calculated groundwater table elevation relative to the NABD 88 datum, and this is in feet, and then the calculated salinity, which is on the far right. Groundwater table height is calculated by taking the depth from the surface and the surface elevation at the site using the NOAA and South Carolina DNR DM that was developed in 2017. Shown GPS, these surface elevations are taken from GPS coordinates and laid onto that digital elevation model, and it gives us an idea of the exact surface elevation at the soil level. And then what we do is we calculate the groundwater table elevation based on the surface elevation that we take from the soil, and then the groundwater elevation we take from doing some calculations with the well collar and the depth of the groundwater table. Seen here is a set of data that was taken between mid-April and mid-May. As you can see, the numbers are decreasing by about 1 foot from the beginning and to the end. And this is over a course of about a month. So you see at 133 Conifer Lane, it went from an elevation of 4.6 feet to 3.5 feet in May. And this is to be expected at this time of year. This is when a lot of the vegetation is starting to get into production and producing leaves, and it's starting to soak up more water out of the ground. So you're going from a more wet season to a dry season. And this is to be expected. And we're trying to capture these sorts of fluctuations throughout the year, not just within the growing period, but also well into the summer, into the fall, and throughout the winter. Going forward, we have several next steps outlined for the remainder of the project, at least for this phase. In mid-June, we received a shipment of the data loggers that I was shared earlier that can be deployed in wells to continuously gather data without the need for researchers actually being at the sites. So we can leave it at the sites and come back 3 months later and take the data in and provide analysis and that sort of thing. We're also planning to install the last set of wells in Kiawah Island. All the materials currently needed for the wells were acquired in June in preparation for the installs later on in the year. We're also planning to produce maps that illustrate the groundwater table and seasonal fluctuations throughout the year. This is currently in progress and will be a part of a thesis project with a graduate researcher at the College of Charleston. Finally, we are currently developing the phase 2 research component and the various options to improve our understanding of groundwater. On this list is investigating influences to the groundwater, such as rainfall and evapotranspiration, that can be used to develop a water budget for Kiawah in order to give us a better understanding of the influences to the groundwater. And another instance that's on here, and not on here actually, last week we released a video on YouTube. It's part of the Learning with Lee series. We release videos every week or 2 weeks outlining some different research on the island, and we've done we've captured and showcased some properties as well as some research from other individuals through interviews. But this time we did a step-by-step process for installing wells and monitoring for the groundwater project. And I invite anybody to go look at it and see what is involved with installing these wells. It takes about 3 hours, but the video is only about 6 minutes. So, and what I've heard is it's pretty informative. But I'd like to move on to the Marsh Vulnerability project, if there's no questions.
Lee, I
yes?
do just a couple questions. I mean, my sense is once these wells are installed, that there's really not, is there ever really an end to this project? Or in essence, are these wells that you will want to be continuing to collect data and study in terms of looking at what's happening to salinity changes and water changes? I mean, is this a 15, 20 year thing that we'll want to continue to monitor and track this data, or is this a much shorter project than that?
This is a long-term project, as the way I'm perceiving it. These wells are pretty good to use for the next 20 years without having too much an issue. It's just a matter of cleaning the wells out every now and then. And the equipment that we have can be used for years and years to come. And I think the information that we get out of this would help not only Kiawah Island look into saltwater intrusion and different types of fluctuations in the groundwater, but also help other barrier islands. I see this as a very good research project for Kiawah and to continue this into the future, yes.
So would you have a guess, obviously, one of the reasons the interest in this is the concern that over time, water table changes will have effect on the freshwater lens and therefore an impact on our natural vegetation, the types of tree, the ability of trees to live in marshes on high ground. In what time frame will we start to see enough data that you can begin drawing any kinds of conclusions about whether there are or are not changes taking place in our groundwater that will affect things like our vegetation?
That's a very good question. And we've had several discussions with the South Carolina Geological Survey, as well as researchers in sea level rise. And one of the recommendations they have is to establish a long-term effort, because you're not going to see those immediate impacts within a year because of the fluctuations that happen. So likely the minimum amount would probably be around 10 years when you would start to be able to draw conclusions that you would have a rising sea level and that it is exacerbating conditions in the environmental aspects.
But is the idea being that at some point you'll learn enough from this that hopefully if we have changes taking place that ultimately are going to cause a change in trees or whatever, that this has the ability of being a leading indicator to that?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Good. Another question, Lee, this is Dan. You mentioned that once these wells are installed, you can monitor them, it sounded like remotely. Is that done electronically? How do you gather or collect the data?
I don't know if you can see me. Let's see if I can pull it up. So we have these kind of small monitoring equipment that we can deploy in the wells, and they hang into the water and they take measurements automatically, and we can set that all up at the office. So we have one that gathers just level and temperature, and then we have another one that looks at temperature, level, and conductivity. And we'd be able just to deploy these in the wells without even having to touch them for months and months at a time. And then once we go back to the wells, we take them, put them into the computer, and we get all the information from that 3-month period.
Okay. So every 3 months you physically have to go out, but in between times you've got in effect, a monitor.
Yes, and I think at the moment, 3 months is on the top of my mind as an easy way for us to collect the data. But once we get a better idea of how to use the equipment over time, we're going to develop protocols in order to establish how we're going to collect it and how we're going to analyze it.
Great. Thank you, Lee.
I can turn on the light real quick. All right. Does anybody have any other questions or? All right. I'd like to move into the Marsh Vulnerability project. And the other project is working with the marsh specifically. And the marshes are constantly adapting to different changing conditions along the coast, including sea level rise and saltwater inundation. Mapping these changes within the marsh allows us to visualize areas within the marsh that are maybe indicating areas that are in need of restoration efforts, or maybe that are just changing based on the normal natural course of nature. And also there's an importance to understanding the human influences to the marsh, since we can affect the health of these wetlands, and since they lie downstream from our communities. For this project, we had a handful of objectives. First, we wanted to map the vegetative shorelines within the marsh to observe changes over time. Secondly, we wanted to map the human infrastructure adjacent to the marsh and create a catalog of these structures to provide reference to areas of great impact. Lastly, we wanted to look into the natural features and land cover changes within the marsh due to tidal fluctuations, so we can have a general view of how the marsh is changing over time and how it is being affected currently as well as in the past. The methods for this project include using advanced mapping software to outline the changes in the marsh. This would take aerial imagery and capture marsh vegetation extents at specific periods in time, which can be overlaid with each other to observe changes back to back. Each of the maps that would be created would be taken from during low tide events in order to get the full extent of the marsh, and allow us to also create a map that illustrates these changes back to back. Along with the shorelines, we would also develop a map created to illustrate the current infrastructure located adjacent to the marsh. And this includes structures such as docks, revetments, bridges, dikes, and that sort of thing. Illustrated here is a map showing the full extent of our marsh shorelines for the project. And this it goes all the way from the western tip of Seabrook out towards the marsh areas and all the way into the far reaches of the Stoner River. And it goes from Kiawah Island all the way up to the south shoreline of Johns Island. This represents about 8 individual years of data taken within a 40-year period between 1977 and 2017. However, it's not easy to see these shoreline changes within the map shown, so I've blown them up to give an example of what we're looking at here. So this is a zoomed in picture of the shorelines to better illustrate what is found in the data set. Shown here is the confluence of Bass Creek and Center Creek on the eastern portion of Kiawah Island, sort of north of Ocean Park and south of the preserve neighborhood. For reference, there's a yellow arrow that's pointing to the marsh shoreline from 1977, and then there's a blue arrow pointing to the shoreline from 2015. For the most part, these creeks in this area are perceived to have an equal accretion and erosion rate, and this is associated with some natural movement of waterways, and mostly it's just how the sediment is moving back and forth and redistributing itself. In the next map, we illustrate the shoreline changes in the marshland east of the Kiawah River, kind of out east on the Kiawah River Bridge, and noting shorelines from 3 different time periods over a 38-year period. Notice in 1977, there was clearly a defined creek at low tide, which slowly became more and more open as time progressed. And this drastic change is also shown in the aerial imagery that's on screen, which was taken in 2017. And these are the sorts of things that we're trying to capture within these images and these data sets, is the decline in some of the marshland areas that would be able to allow us to prioritize some restoration efforts in the future, or potentially see where we're going to have impacts and project them later. Lastly, the map shown on screen here is the marsh infrastructure, and it's an example of what we're going to get with the data set that we've been provided by the College of Charleston through help by South Carolina Seed Grant and the South Carolina Department of Health and Environmental Control. You can see this is in Rhett's Bluff, and you can see that the marsh infrastructure is outlaid in purple. And it includes the docks that are along the northern portion, and you can actually see in the middle is the Rhett's Bluff boat landing dock. Out to the right, you can see Captain Maynard's Island, and you can see that the road that leads out there is connected by infrastructure that was built on top of the marsh. And you can also see Bass Creek. Right along the edge of it is the dike that leads out to Rhett's Bluff, which is also holding back water. So these are the sorts of things that we would see within this data set, and this would include the full extent of Kiawah Island. Let me go back. All right. So the next steps within this project are provide the current map layers to the town of Kiawah Island for use in the drafting of the marsh management plan. This would consist of the marsh shorelines and the infrastructure that have been cataloged in the project so far. Following the June 2020 report, the college procured 3 additional shorelines to use on the project. They're currently working on finalizing these shorelines and subjecting them to some quality control and quality assurance, and should be available shortly. Lastly, the project team will focus on quantifying these changes within the marsh by running an amber analysis on the shorelines. This method was developed by Chester Jackson to study Jekyll Island in Georgia around 2012 for his doctoral thesis. And then later on, he went on to digitize the entire shoreline of South Carolina in 2017, to provide to DHEC to look at changing shorelines throughout the region. However, it is a very coarse data set. It gives us a good example of where we might see potential impacts. But with this project that we're working on with the College of Charleston now, it'll be looking at the Kiawah marshlands at a finer scale than the 2017 study, and allow us to look at specific areas where we can put boots on the ground projects to potentially mitigate issues with shoreline erosions, as well as to look at where our current status is with the natural infrastructure in the marsh. And before I continue, I wanted to have a special thanks to a lot of people who made these projects worthwhile. They provided a lot of help, a lot of assistance through these. I want to specifically thank the town of Kiawah Island for projects. We couldn't have done this without you and your help. I want to thank the Department of Geology and Environmental Geosciences with the College of Charleston. Dr. Tim Callahan and Dr. Norma Bean have been very great in helping out with these projects and providing their assistance, especially with the graduate researchers that involve with us. They've been very helpful and very expeditious with us. I'd like to thank the Projects Advisory Committee. We have 4 people that are currently serving on it. Dr. Jane Ellis, Dr. John Leffler, Lucas Hernandez, and Jim Jordan, sorry, excuse me. And also like to thank Landon Knapp at the South Carolina Sea Grant Consortium for allowing us to have some communication between us and the college, and making all of this easy administratively. He's been a really big help. The Kiawah Island Community Association's Land and Lakes Department has been very helpful in installing some of the groundwater wells. And thank you for allowing us the opportunity to use some of your crew members in order to install a few wells. And it goes without saying that if I didn't mention you here, I just want to thank any of the volunteers that have been working with us on this project and providing some assistance with this. It's been very helpful, and we're very grateful to have such a great partnership with the community and being able to put these projects in. And those are the sources if anybody's interested. All right.
And Lee, let me, again, on this one, I know right now in this project, we're primarily, as I understand it, creating a database over a series of years so that we understand the contours and nature of our marsh. At what point and through what part of the process does this start to result in any kinds of analysis or observations? Does that come out of the town's then marsh management plan, or will this study start to create some observations?
Yes, absolutely. So whenever we run the analysis for the Amber study, we're able to see and quantify the changes within the marsh. So we have a visual representation of it through the shorelines that we've drawn out. But what the Amber analysis will do is provide us with a way to physically see those changes and being able to calculate them and seeing where we're having the greatest impacts. And we're likely to see those fairly soon. The college is working on the analysis now since they just finished the shorelines. So we should have that by the end of the year. Yes.
I have a comment, Mayor, I'd like to make for Lee. Lee, I did watch your, I believe it was the Maritime Forest and the Hillocks video. It was very good. I learned a lot from what you had to say. And anyone who hasn't watched any of the travel stories Conservancy puts out is really missing something. It's great explanations of the key areas around the island. Thank you, Lee.
Thank you.
Council members, any comments, questions?
I would only add that I think this is some of the best work I've seen from the Conservancy in the years that I've been on the island. And I know you guys do a lot of education and a lot of programs.
Mhm.
This is some very good concrete work that will help us make better decisions going forward. I compliment you and the entire Conservancy for the effort.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Chris, and also say, you know, these things only become valuable over time. But unless we get started with a database, which is what's being done in both cases, you don't build any database, you know, years from now. So 10 years from now, we'll begin to really appreciate how valuable this is. We may not see it today, but unless we get started, 10 years from now, we'll be still guessing at what we should do. Good job, Lee. Keep it up.
Thank you, Dan.
Anything else? And Lee, I know we've provided funding. Otherwise, in terms of resources, I know you're working closely with College of Charleston. We've got staff involved. At the moment, you've got all the resources you need to move this forward?
Yes, currently, yes, we do.
Right. All right. If there's, Lee, thanks very much. Unless there's any other questions, then we will move on. Although keep all of this in mind, because when we get to the discussion of the sea level rise resiliency adaptive management model, I'm going to come back and probably use this project as an example to try to describe some of the things they're trying to get at with that model. So Lee, thanks.
Yeah.
Let's move to old business, item A, status update on the OCRM 2016-18 lines by Jim Jordan. And Jim, I want to make sure, I know you're going to update us on where we are with these long awaited lines. In my recollection, this project, well, this current set of lines started well before the current town council members came into office. So if I recollect, and so they may or may not, I know Chris is up to speed on it, but the others may or may not be fully up to speed on the OCRM lines and how important they actually are in terms of their impact on long-term on development. So it would be good to give a little bit of background here on these and where we've been, because these are lines which were supposed to have been finished at the end of what, 2017 or 18?
17.
17, yeah. Okay. All right, it's all yours.
Okay. I'm gonna share my screen real quick. Let's see. All right. All right. So I've just got kind of one slide to kind of give you a little background on the jurisdictional lines that that OCRM sets. They are updated every 8 to 10 years. The update prior to this one was in 2012. And they started the process in late 2016, but the lines for Kiawah were released in 2017. And those lines moved significantly landward in a lot of areas throughout the state, but also on Kiawah. So after I run through this, I'm gonna pull up the map showing the 2012 lines, the 2017 proposed, and then what we actually have now in place. So during the revision process in 2016 and 2017, as I said, the lines moved significantly landward. And so a lot of beach communities were concerned about that because obviously the further landward they go, it just decreases the amount of area along the beach where homes can be built and where different activities can take place. So there was a lot of discussion at that point. The legislature and the governor got involved, and ultimately they passed Act 173 in 2018. And this act did a number of things, and I'm not going to go through everything that the act did, but just highlight a couple of the big ones. And so the first was that future lines can no longer move seaward. So they cannot move towards the ocean. Historically, if an area of the island or to accrete a lot of land, and then they went through another revision process, the setback line could move closer to the ocean to encompass that new land that was formed. But that is no longer the case. So the lines either have to remain the same or they have to move further away from the ocean.
And Jim, if I can interject for everybody, on an island like Kiawah, where that particularly is important or different than other islands, a lot of the other islands along the coast are not accreting. And so one of the advantages that we've had as an island is because we're accreting, we might have a setback line, and then 8 years or 10 years later, when they do it, we've added land seaward. We have the ability actually for those lines to go out and take advantage of that new beach, which, depending on what your views are, some people would really like because they would argue it provides more developmental space, or some people might very much not like because they felt it was allowing to impinge on the natural beach. And so because Kiawah is been accreting, the fact that lines couldn't go further seaward was perceived, at least by someone looking to develop their property, as a negative, because they might not be able in a future time period to take advantage of that of having that line move outward.
Yep, that's very, very accurate. So then the other kind of major thing the act did was it basically said, okay, we know there are a lot of problems with the 2017 line. And so what they did was they said, okay, well, the new line is going to be basically a hybrid line. So it will either be the location of the 2012 line or the 2017 proposed line, whichever one is closest to the ocean. So in other words, the 2012 line, or the newly established line, effectively could not move landward from where it was in 2012, if that makes sense. And when we look at the map, you'll kind of be able to see that. And so while that act was passed in 2018, it took OCRM until about a month and a half ago to actually generate this hybrid line, this new line for the entire state. And so now that line is available. And then the next revision, and again, Act 173 basically set a new revision cycle. And so it actually states that the next revision will take place after January 1st, 2024. And then the last thing on here that I wanted to mention, which was a caveat, when I downloaded this data, the new data from OCRM, there is a caveat in there that the baseline and setback lines for Captain Sam Spit are pending litigation. And so until that litigation is resolved, the lines in that area remain at the 2012 location. All right, I'm gonna pull up this map here 1 second. Let's see. Okay, so it's going to be a little hard to see. I'll just kind of pick an area where I know there's some pretty significant changes. So what you're looking at here is the in green is going to be the 2009 line, and then the blue is going to be what OCRM proposed for Kiawah in 2017. So you can see, this is an area down on Flyway. The setback line was pretty far out, and then the 2017 proposed moved it, almost back to where the homes are. And so I'll zoom back over just to another spot on Eugenia. This is an area where, so historically, Kiawah has not had any homes that were seaward of the setback line. And if you're seaward of the setback line, it certainly has an impact on how and when you can rebuild and that sort of thing. So with the 2017 line, as you can see here on Eugenia, the majority of homes, at least on the eastern end of Eugenia, were going to be beyond the setback line, as well as Mariners Watch and potentially some of Windswept. And so if I turn back on, or I turn on the final proposed line, now, right, effectively, this is going to basically follow whichever of these two lines is closest to the ocean. So now the line that we're operating under now in the Eugenia area is basically reverted back to the 2012 location.
So
So if I do,
the issue we had here 2 years ago, 3 years ago, when these were proposed, is you would have had all of these property owners who would have had serious consequences in a situation where, for in example, in a storm, their properties had been demolished and or impacted by a certain percent. Their ability to rebuild, they can rebuild. It's the question of putting restrictions on how they did. And so much of the last 2 years in creating these lines have been driven by these kinds of situations and trying to resolve this.
correct. Yeah. So effectively, at the end of the day, no areas on Kiawah got worse than 2012. In other words, no lines moved closer to the ocean. And so we still have 0 homes now that are seaward of the setback line, just like we did in 2012.
So that's good for property owners, right, Jane?
I'll just show you one. Yes, correct. So one more area that changed fairly significantly. So there weren't that many places where the new line was seaward of the old line. One exception was down here by the ocean course, where the line moved basically to the edge of the driving range, and then moved quite a bit out into the marsh. So that really doesn't affect a whole lot out there. So now that the new lines are in place, we are finalizing the update to the beach management plan, which I think is going to come to council next month. Any questions or anything else you want to see on that?
Jim, at the end of the day, did we, outside of Captain said, did we end up with any property owners who ultimately appealed and or sued with respect to the lines affecting their property, and have all of those, if there were any, were all of those finally resolved here?
That is my understanding based on what I downloaded from OCRM. That was the only exception to the new line was for Captain Sam's.
For Captain Sam's, which is outstanding. Okay.
Yes.
Any questions by council members?
Thank you, Jim.
No, very interesting.
And I think, one of the issues, again, if 2 years ago, because Kiawah is now primarily developed, because there is very little undeveloped beachfront property, ultimately these lines, with the exception of maybe, well, not even really with Captain Sam's, but all of these lines have less impact on us right now. They aren't really impacting new development. The impact is really on the situation with any of our beachfront properties, should those properties be impacted in a storm or whatever. For some communities, this is much more significant because they've got a lot more undeveloped property, but it has been an issue. It was certainly 3 years ago, this was a very big issue with a number of property owners and a number of developers.
Good.
All right, Jim, Bobcats and rodenticide.
All right, here we go. Let's find another one. Okay, so I just wanted to give everyone a quick update on on the whole rodenticide issue and particularly the effect on bobcats. And I know we've talked about this a couple of times here, so I won't go into too much background. I think we kind of all know what the issue is. That our bobcat numbers are down significantly. Our deer numbers are up significantly. We're hitting more deer with cars. We're having more landscape shrubbery damage caused by deer because of the reduction in bobcat numbers. So a lot of changes to the island because of what's going on. So just, a quick update on what we've seen so far this year. And I won't spend too much time on this slide. I think you all understand, the issue with these rodenticides that are second generation anticoagulants. Effectively, they're quite toxic. They can kill a rat in one feeding, but that rat's going to run around for a while and potentially get eaten by a bobcat. And then over time, it builds up in the bobcat system and can ultimately cause them to die. So kind of to look specifically at what we're seeing with our cats, have a few updates on this for you. So that last year was the first that we picked up on this problem. When we had an adult female, she died last August. We were able to get her tested and figure out that she died from basically eating rat poison. She had 5 different rat poisons in her system. At that point, we launched a pretty extensive public education program, asking residents, regimes, entities, and even pest control companies to voluntarily comply, basically to stop using these products so that we would reduce impacts to our bobcats. And we had hoped that strategy was working, and it certainly is to some extent. But we've had 2 major issues already this year that I wanted to let you know about. So on May 19th, we lost one of our GPS collared adult male bobcats. We don't know 100% for sure what killed this cat, but based on everything we saw at the scene and what the lab determined from the initial analyses, it's very likely that when we get the results back, that this will be another death from SGAs. And then probably even more tragic, we all know our bobcat numbers are declining, and the one thing that can bring the numbers back up is adding new bobcats to the population. And so we had a very unfortunate incident on June 10th. Bobcat 600, one of our adult females, she died during labor, and all 4 of her kittens died as well. It is almost a guarantee that this is going to be another SGA caused death. This bobcat, and I'll talk a little bit about the blood testing we did this winter, but she was the one bobcat that tested positive for exposure to Brodifacoum, which is an SGA, in February of 2020. And again, based on what we saw at the scene and what the lab is telling us, it's almost a guarantee that this is going to be another SGA related death. So, so that's 6 additional bobcats that have died this year. And while we don't know, again, 100%, if it's caused by SGAs, it's very likely, and we should know in the next few weeks. I think I've already updated you on the blood testing at our April meeting, but I'll just kind of run back through that again. So as I said, Bobcat 600, which is the one that died in June, she tested positive in her blood sample for exposure. And then 2 out of the 4, not counting Bobcat 600, while they didn't have SGAs in their blood, they had unusual blood chemistry that would suggest that they had prior exposure. And because the SGAs only stay in the blood for a week or maybe 2, it's not a great technique to pick up on exposure levels. So, we don't know for sure if those other cats had long-term issues. And then the last thing, and I've already said this, and we all know that our numbers are declining. In 2019, we lost 4 out of our 6 collared bobcats, so that's a 66% mortality rate. This year we had 4 bobcats collared, and 2 of those are dead already this year. So we're at a 50% mortality rate, and still have half the year to go. I can tell you that historically our mortality rate for bobcats, going back to our studies in 2000 and 2004, was 10% or less. So this is
Jim?
a significant change. Yeah.
Jim, can you tell me how long have these second generation SGAs been in effect? Is it just the last couple of years and so we're seeing this, or have they been around longer, but we just haven't really caught up to understanding their impact until the last couple of years?
So they've been around quite some time. I'm sure some of the pest control guys on here could chime in, but I think it's at least 15, 20 plus years that they've been around. And so it's a great question. And that's a question that Aaron and I, had was, okay, these products have been around for 20 plus years. If we had an issue prior to about 2 years ago, we would know about it, and we haven't had an issue. So the question of why an issue now, our guess or our thoughts are that it's just a shift in the industry to using these products, and whether that is because marketing is better or but it just seems to be that these are now the go-to product for pest control companies to put out. They're highly effective, and so my guess is that we're just seeing a lot more use of those out in the environment right now.
So Jim, sorry, you're saying that they've been around for 15 years, but you suspect they were used a lot less and now they're kind of ubiquitous, or what?
That's my theory. The other possibility is, that, and again, I think, we've got some of the pest control reps on this meeting, and maybe they have some information they can share, after I get through my presentation here. But, when you have a company, for example, a large company that's servicing 1,000 or more homes, right? If they make a change to their protocol, overnight to switch to a product, which I don't know that they did, but I'm saying potentially, just a business decision to move to a different product by one or two companies could have a dramatic impact on the amount of this stuff in the environment.
But I'm still a little bemused. We had this on the agenda a few months ago and it had to be taken off the agenda because, someone informed us it wasn't under our control. But I am bemused with all the things that we look at that we try to regulate because they do damage to our environment, our brand, whatever it may be. This thing here seems to be something that's easy to get on top of. Why can't we just stop this? Outlaw it. No more. They're not allowed to be used on Kiawah. They're killing the cats. And it's not, you're not making this up. This is pretty obvious that this is happening. So I just can't fathom why this is still being used and why we allow it to be used.
Yeah, I think, we had a meeting earlier today with some representatives from the Clemson Department of Regulation. That's, the state agency or state group that basically regulates these products, as well as a couple of representatives from the industry itself. But in terms of regulating them directly, we can't do that. It seems fairly clear in state law that we don't have the legal ability to regulate these products directly. Now, there may be another strategy to regulate these products that doesn't regulate them directly, but rather regulates the manner in which they are applied. But I think, and so that idea, which I don't know that we are there yet, but that idea would be to effectively ban the feeding, enticing, or attracting of any wildlife species outdoors with any food product or other attractant. So if you did that and had exemptions for, bird feeders and other things, that effectively you would be banning the use of these, sorry, I went all dark, banning the use of these poisons without, addressing them directly, which we can't do.
Hey,
Yeah.
Craig, I mean, this is probably a non-starter, but every pest control company that does business on Kiawah needs a business license, right?
Yep.
Can we not make the awarding of a business license subject to them not doing certain things, like for instance, using these products?
Well,
Great question. I'm not sure.
Before I'm going to answer that two ways. Eventually, I'm going to say, well, on my Zoom here, sitting on your head is our attorney, Joe, because he's in the little screen right above you. So I'll turn that in a second to him to take a shot at. But I think before that, we had a conversation. I don't know if Jim's going to get into that or how he wants this conversation to flow, but I participated in a conversation with representatives from Clemson, from the pesticide industry, and also from a local, one of our more prominent local pesticide companies. And the theme I heard from that was setting aside legal issues of ordinances and so on, was a desire, a recognition and understanding of the issue we were dealing with and the importance of this to Kiawah and to its residents. And what I heard was a desire to work with the town in a variety of ways in order to reduce or eliminate the use of these kinds of pesticides. So, at the moment, and I think Jim can get into that, and some of these folks are here, is that I think what I clearly heard was the desire to go down a path, at least if we could at first, that would get us to the end result in a positive, non-litigative, non-ordinance fashion. But to your specific question, do we have that ability? I'll let Joe, if he wishes to opine, I'll ask Joe if he has an opinion on that.
Yeah, so the state has a specific law that we call it a field preemption law. And it's something I've become quite familiar with because it's been a point of contention with our emergency ordinances. But in the case of rodenticides, there is a very specific statute that says only the state can regulate the use of rodenticides. It doesn't use those words exactly, but that's what it says. And so we, as a municipality, under that statute, are constrained when we make any effort to go into that area of the law. And it's just such broad language. It's just something that the state, for whatever reason, has decided that only they can regulate. Now, and I would point out that it's not an uncommon provision among states. Some of the points that Jim made with, I don't want to say circumventing that restriction, but still nonetheless trying to pass laws that are going to limit the use of this rodenticide. I feel a little constrained to talk about that. I think it's fair to say that there's probably going to be some uphill battles legally if we go into that area. And it's just solely based on a state statute.
And I would only add, Klaus, to your comment that we do have, and I don't want to sound like I'm trying to go towards litigation here, because I really would like to get out on the table here what we heard from the representatives that we just spoke to. But we have on this island a lot of current and former ex-attorneys, very capable, very thoughtful people I've been contacted by a number of them who, whose opinions I respect. And there's certainly, I've heard from a number of people who have different legal theories and are even willing to devote their time to assisting the town in pursuing some of those. But I think, as Joe said, none of them are easy and none of them are certain. And I only have to speak here purely for myself, not for the council. To the extent that to the extent that at the end of the day, any resident can tell their pest control company, don't use this stuff. And to the extent it seems like we have an industry who is at least at the moment holding out and saying they're willing to work with us, I'm more inclined to want to follow that latter strategy. But Jim, I don't know if you want to summarize that discussion or whether some of them are on the call here.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just kind of give a brief overview of what we discussed at 12:30 today, and I think we have pretty much, well, almost everybody, who was on that call here today. So, I think this is a great opportunity. If members of council want to speak directly with the director of the Clemson Department of Pesticide Regulation, he's here. The deputy director is here. We have a representative from a major pest control company who I think is still on. We may, yep.
Yeah, he's on. He's on.
Yeah. Okay. So effectively, as the mayor kind of alluded to, we talked about the issue and everyone recognizes there's an issue. And I think, the mayor said this earlier, the devil is in the details, so we know we have an issue. We want to pursue a education, voluntary compliance, consumer-driven strategy to get these products off of Kiawah. So we just got to come up with the best strategy to do that. And so I think that, the plan as it stands right now is to kind of reconvene, these folks here in another week or two and try to get down to details. But I think the strategy again would be educate the public, educate / potentially train or certify pest control providers, and basically come up with a multifaceted plan, to ideally eliminate the use of these products.
Hey, Jim, give us some talking points here. How do we explain to a owner on Kiawah who says, okay, I don't want to kill the bobcats, what is the next most efficient, safe alternative, and what drawbacks does it have? What do I tell him or her?
Yeah, so it's not rocket science. So there are 2, if not a lot more, rodenticides with active ingredients that are not going to hurt bobcats if they eat a rat that's consumed these products. But they still kill rats and mice pretty much just as well as the SGAs do. So utilizing products or telling your pest control company to utilize a product containing, for example, the active ingredient cholecalciferol. If everyone on the island switched to that, then this problem would go away. But it's complicated, right? If you were to go out and shop for a rodenticide, I mean, each active ingredient has probably got 20 or 30 or 40 different trade names and formulations. And, you got to look at the fine print to see the active ingredient on that.
But Jim,
before you know what you're using.
Jim, wouldn't the professionals who are probably handling most of this stuff know specifically what's in each item? And therefore, if I were a homeowner and I said, I would like you to use something that doesn't include these second generation problem ones, they'd be happy to do it. They want to stay in business. They're in favor of bobcats too, I would think. I'd love to hear from whoever is on the line who's in this business.
Mr. Smith, are you
Yes,
available?
I'm here.
Oh, there you go. He's
I'm
with
here.
Meadow Exterminators.
Great.
Yeah, my name's Ken Smith. I'm Vice President of Operations for Palmetto Exterminators. We do have a very large footprint on Kiawah. We probably serve over 1,000 customers out there. And when the town of Kiawah reached out to us about the bobcat issue, we did immediately put a change in our protocols in place. We went to the standard protocol for baiting for rodents has pretty much been you put a bait box down and you put the second gen product in it. Reason for that is it's there. If the rodents feed on it, it kills them and it kills them quickly. So it's efficient. It works well. It doesn't require a lot of extra monitoring. And what I said before in the earlier meeting is this has been a paradigm shift with this. Of course, I don't think there's an exterminator out there that's going to tell you that they don't care if we kill a bobcat. Nobody wants to kill wildlife. In our industry, we term that as a non-target species. So what we did is we went to a different type of, really can't call it a bait. It's a monitoring block that you can put in there. So if the rodents feed on it, there's no active ingredient. It won't kill anything. But when we go back and check those bait boxes, it allows us to see that there has been feeding on that block. Now we can put in an active ingredient bait, which cholecalciferol is one of the ones that the one Jim brought up, which it's only going to kill the rodent. If a bobcat eats it, it won't do anything to the bobcat. So we know that's a safe way going forward. And we're looking at I'm looking at putting that protocol within our company-wide. Because this is not just an issue of bobcats on Kiawah. This is an issue with homeowners' pets, dogs, cats who get into this bait. It makes them sick. It can kill them, and it does kill them. So it's just, again, when it takes something like this once in a while for us to realize, okay, we need to rethink how we're doing these things. And that's basically what's happened.
Great. Well, that's very helpful, Ken, because if you can do it, I can't imagine that most people who you compete with wouldn't want to do the same thing, especially if the homeowner begins to say, I need you to do this, right? I mean, why wouldn't you? You want to stay in business. You want to grow your business.
Well, and I can't speak for every exterminator out there. The one thing that I do know is that, doing them anytime, we call it IPM, Integrated Pest Management. That's usually a less active ingredient product approach. You do more monitoring, you do more inspecting, and then you target treatment. It's a greener approach, and it's certainly more sensitive. So I'm trying to think of the right way to phrase this.
I'm worried.
Not everybody is worried about doing that. Not everybody wants to do that because it does and it will take more time. So their answer is, I don't want to change anything. What I do is fine. It's not going to bother that. Yes, you are correct. If you get the homeowners involved saying, I don't want you using these products on my house, they're not going to have any option but to change the way they do business.
Right.
And I know Jim spoke earlier about, I don't know, Jim, if it was a letter you sent out, but you only got responses from two companies. And I don't know how many are on that island, but there's a lot more than two exterminating companies doing business on that island.
Yeah, I mean, I think we sent out 25 notifications. I think we had 25 maybe companies listed that had business licenses, and the two responses were companies that responded and said, we will voluntarily stop using it.
Please tell me another one of them.
Yeah. Okay. I had some responses that were, no, we're not going to stop using this.
Exactly.
I had some that were, well, you got to choose. Do you want bobcats or do you want rats?
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
So that's kind of what I was trying to say in a nice way, that not everybody's going to have that outlook, Dan.
Okay, but wait. Let me just go back to that. And I guess I'm just lacking the understanding of it. Someone responded, well, you got to choose. Do you want bobcats or do you want rats? Is that a choice? I don't understand why. What advantage does this newer second generation product that also kills our bobcats? What does that do? Does it kill the rats faster, more efficiently, kill more of them? Or how is it an advantage? Because you just said the older products or different products, they'll also kill. They just won't kill the bobcats.
Yes, and the second gen, they are an older product. They've been around for as long as I've been in this industry, almost 30 years, and they've been around since I've been in this industry. So, but the answers to everything you said is yes. They work faster. They're more efficient. There is a place for them. Okay. What we're saying is the place is not around someone's house who you're not sure if they have a rodent issue or they don't have one. So we don't go in there with in other words, you don't go in there with the biggest cannon you have right up front. You can go in there with a pellet gun first and see how that works. And if it doesn't, you can graduate. So I think it would be a mistake to say we need to eliminate them completely, because there are applications that you need to use them in. But to say we just use them everywhere, that's the wrong approach also. Does that answer your question?
It does, I think. Yes, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So I might ask, and then I think we can, unless there's any other questions, we move on. Steve Cole with Clemson talked in our meeting about, his view of the direction that we need to move, or a direction, which is really more focused on education, better understanding who the decision makers are in determining what products are used and how to focus on that. Steve, are you on the call? Yeah. And I wonder if you have anything to add here.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I'll just add to what Ken has said, and I think Dan alluded to it just a minute ago. The ultimate decision maker on who uses these products is the homeowner and the residents. If they have the information they need to make an informed decision and advise their pest control operators on what they would prefer to be used, I think there's no choice, but the pest control companies are going to have to, if they want to keep those customers, they're going to have to make some adjustments to how they do these things. So the big push I think that Clemson can help make is twofold at least, and perhaps more. Certainly we can provide more information to share with homeowners on what to ask for, what to look for, what they should avoid with the questions that they have and products to use, how to guide their pest control operator in the direction that you want them to go in, but also working with the pest control industry, which I think will be a very easy thing to do. We have numerous meetings with the association and membership, and we'll have opportunities to share the information, the concerns that the island has, and let them know that the homeowners are going to start making requests for other products to be utilized on the island to help protect the bobcat population and minimize some of the risk. And that's the goal with any pesticide product that we have across the state, even the products that are used in agricultural settings. If we find that there's a risk that's there, the best way to mitigate that risk is to find alternatives through IPM practices that Ken touched on. We can reduce risk voluntarily just by making a few changes in cultural control methods, which would be certain practices outside in the landscape, helping educate the homeowners as to what is really a pest issue and what's not a pest issue. Jim Jordan and I talked about that a little bit a couple weeks ago as well. And then helping homeowners understand that we have a lot of tools in the toolbox that we can utilize when we have to go to a pest control option that can control these rodents in a proper way that's just as effective. May take a little more effort on the front end, but a lot more dividends on the back end with regard to environmental risks. So I think there's a lot of things that we can facilitate on our end as far as helping get the homeowners educated and understand what kinds of questions to ask to be more informed, and then also facilitating discussions with the pest control industry and making sure they understand companies like Ken's are already making changes. And if you want to remain a viable contractor on this island, you're going to have to make some of those changes as well, because the homeowners are going to start demanding different products be utilized. And I think the industry folks will be supportive of that for the most part. And the ones that aren't, they're going to have to figure out different ways to have customers, because the island's going to demand it. So I appreciate the opportunity for us to come together, and I appreciate the discussions and the information Jim has given us for sure, and look forward to trying to facilitate programs and exchanging of information and education. And if you've been in the education business, you know the goal is behavior change. And I think if we can get the right information out there, we'll see behavior changes with the more informed population that's on the island as far as the residents. And then also the industry will be much more aware of the concerns, and the change there will come as well.
Chris and Stephanie, you both sat in the meeting that Jim hosted earlier. Anything to add? Any other observations or views to add?
Well, we had a good hour and 10-minute discussion, and walking into it, I wasn't quite sure what to expect, but it really does get down to the homeowner demanding what they want and won't accept. So, we're going to have to start a Save the Bobcat campaign, and with Clemson's help and Ken's help, start educating people. But that's the only solution to this thing, given we're blocked on the legislative side of the world.
And if I could add one thing also, it could be something as simple as a preferred vendor. In other words, if you've got companies that are not going to do what you ask them to do, you just, you publish it. I'm sure Kiawah has some kind of a publication they send out to the homeowners. You just let them know who the companies are that are willing to work with them to try to take care of this problem.
Yeah.
Just an idea.
That's a great idea. And Jim, I think, you know better than I think this is urgent. We're losing bobcats at a rate that we can't afford to lose anymore. This is nuts. I remember even 2 years ago, I would regularly see bobcats. I haven't seen any in the last 12 months. Zero, none. That tells me the problem is serious, and I think homeowners will be on this like a blanket. And I do like Ken's idea. Here are the people who are willing to cooperate, and if your vendor isn't on this list, you ought to think about a different vendor or a way to present it so that we don't appear to be discriminating. But let's face it, that's what we want to do.
Hey, Craig, I love that idea also, but I think we've raised an idea like that in different contexts over the months. Certainly I have. And I think you have always pushed back that was legally questionable. Is that correct?
That who pushed back?
You, saying that was risky and legally questionable if the town came out and effectively said, we like these 6 vendors or you should consider these 6 vendors because they do A, B, and C, and you should consider not using these 3 vendors because they do not do A, B, and C.
Yeah, I'll defer to Joe, but I think the way I've described it in the past is that I think it's okay for us to say, for example, this is the service or the behavior, or I'll use an example of COVID. Right now, we have for restaurants between the state and the county, we've come up with all of these like the Palmetto Pledge, where if you're following certain guidelines, you can put a sticker on your window that says you're following that. And we can go out and say, boy, we think you ought to be going to restaurants that have that sticker, but I don't necessarily publish, oh, by the way, here's the 7 that don't, go to them. And I think the sense has been that it's okay for us to say, here's a protocol that we think is the preferred or is endorsed, the use of, and then, but if then a vendor can show, yeah, we have that Kiawah seal of good housekeeping or whatever, where it has always been explained to me, the danger is by name start picking out individual players and naming winners and losers. But I would quickly toss that question to Joe, but more likely, if this group moves forward to create a specific recommendation, I think that's one of the things they can look at, and where we would need to get a legal opinion.
And one more thing, and I won't say anything else. I say that in the spirit of that should help change other pest control companies' minds and how much they want to cooperate. Because if that happens, they're going to want to be on that list.
You're going to want to be on the list.
Right.
Yeah.
And I just add, I certainly think that's a lot more legally feasible than trying to attack the state law.
Which would just be a lot of legal fees, right?
Well, I'm afraid it'd be legal fees that were what ill spent.
Well, let me characterize so we can move forward. I think what Jim needs to, I think his goal for this and in what he needs to understand is whether in the eyes of the town council, we see this both as a priority, because we have limited staff and limited resources, a priority that you would want to see him and Aaron and the town focus in working with these other individuals to try to pursue this direction. And are you comfortable at the moment, as opposed to pursuing a legal angle, giving this a shot and working with again, with Clemson, with our providers, with the industry, to see if we can arrive at an effective approach that can get us to the same point of not having these products used on the island. I think Jim needs to hear some direction and some marching orders.
Well,
Yeah.
I'll speak up. I think it's urgent, and I think it ought to be a very high priority, because we don't really have, a window here that we can let this continue, or there won't be any bobcats to talk about. So I would consider it urgent, Mary. That would be my recommendation.
I agree.
Agreed.
Okay. Jim, anything else you want to add?
No, I don't think so. We'll start working on a plan and keep everyone posted.
If I can just thank Mr. Wright, Ryan, and Mike as well for being on the call.
Yeah, there are 3 or 4 people that are out there. They didn't that speak on this part of the call, but were really, really helpful on our earlier conversation, and I really appreciate their involvement.
Yeah, they've given us their entire afternoon, so thank you.
Yeah.
Tim, it sounds
All right.
like you are going to be good friends here soon.
All right, we're going to move on then to item C, old business, sea level rise resiliency adaptive management plan. And I think I've got a new cast of characters who are going to be here. We don't have a presentation. I emailed out to all of the council members here a recommendation or an outline of an approach for next steps in addressing sea level rise, which was put together by a group which includes both members of the original sea level rise subcommittee of a couple of years ago, as well as some new individuals that have joined that group since. So we've got Jim Chitwood, Jack Kontz, we've got John Leffler, Kathy Pumphrey, David Pumphrey, Lucas Hernandez. You know all of these folks, and I don't know, I think the only one that's probably not on our call is John was not going to be, John Leffler. And Kathy, is David with us today or not? I don't know.
Yep, he's right there.
In the background.
We're doing it together.
Yeah. So, look, I sent you this document, and I'm going to try to summarize. We're not going to do a presentation, but we really, this group and I need a sense of direction. And so we received from the short term, or from the sea level rise subcommittee, almost 2 years ago, what I think was a spectacular document, study, which I think did 2 things, or maybe did 3 things. One, I think it really crystallized and made the case for the entire community, and certainly for the town council at that time, that sea level rise was an issue that we needed to be concerned about, regardless. And I think they tried to take the politics out of it. They tried to take a lot of the social media debate out of the issue of sea level rise, and I think made a case to say, especially for a coastal community like us, we need to seriously consider and think about the long-term impact that this might have. I also think they helped us better think about what the range of that impact could be over a number of years. And lastly, I think they helped us narrow down for our community what some of the key consequences could be. And you're seeing that in some of the things that have happened over the last year, whether it be Kika's recent recommendation and the work that they've been doing, which Lucas has been behind, which is to really get a handle on drainage, flood management, and the changes that Kika needed to do to better address and deal with their drainage infrastructure. Two of the presentations that you saw here a minute ago from Lee, I think have been driven directly from that work, and the recognition that as a community where the natural environment is the key part of our brand, that we needed to be concerned about the long-term impact of sea level rise on our natural environment, and particularly the impact that it would have on our marshes. And so I think it's clearly had an impact both on the community association, on Kika and their board, on the Conservancy and others on the island. The question, though, that I certainly raised to this group early in the year is, okay, what have we accomplished? Which I think is, what have they accomplished? Which is a lot. But where do we go next? And the fact is, we've grabbed some low-hanging fruit. We've got a lot of projects going on. But what happens down the road? This is not a 2-year thing. We don't create a 5-year plan. This is something that we need to be focused on and thinking about for a number of years. How do we go about doing that? And so what you have in front of you is an approach, a model. They call it adaptive management. It was actually addressed. I mean, you'll see this laid out in their original report back from 2 Octobers ago. But I think it's described in greater detail here. But it's an approach which, without getting into, I'll let them, they're on the here and they can answer all your questions and get into the detail. But it's an approach which basically tries to start by identifying what are the key things down the road that we don't want to see happen as a result of sea level rise, if sea level rise happens. What would be the negative impacts on the community? They term those thresholds, but it's trying to better identify whether you're a property owner, a business owner, a homeowner, what are the potential impacts and results of sea level rise that we do not want to see, that we want to avoid, because if we don't avoid them, it's going to impact either the brand, it's going to impact quality of life on the island, it's going to impact our commercial interest, it's going to impact our property values. Their model then says, if you've identified those things, how do you then begin to quantify and identify what are the levels? How do you know when those are starting to reach a problem level? What are the points in which flooding is an issue, or salinity changes in the marshes are going to jeopardize your marshes? And then how do you put in place a process to monitor those things and then create plans and approaches to deal with that? And I'll ask, that's my summary. Jim, is that a accurate enough summary of your model?
Yeah, I think that's quite good. It is adaptive, so that the key thing that we gain, in addition to being alert and planning for and doing the right things when we need to do them, is that we get to observe what's going on. How fast are things changing? What new technology is there? The plan we had in place tentatively to deal with X or Y or Z, are there better options now for dealing with it? And can we spread the money and everything out over time? So it is adaptive, but the key thing is we need to put in place this concept so that we are alert and ongoing, whether it's 10 years after I've quit doing sea level rise or whatever, that it's ingrained in the system to pay attention to this in a useful and helpful way.
And so I think it's a good model. There's probably a dozen other ways you could approach that, but this is one that I think has been put in front of us. And I think it makes, conceptual sense. It's doable. And from my own perspective, I think that we need to have some sort of approach in place that
Exactly.
that brings some momentum, because again, town council changes, town council makeup changes, KICA board changes, and I think will be problematic if every new council, every new board is starting from scratch to say, okay, now, how do we want to go about thinking about sea level rise, and how do we go about creating a plan that the one constant we can have is to adopt an approach that I think can help all of our organizations work together in sync to think our way through how we identify and adapt to sea level issues. So the first point is, I think they have a good model, and it's one that I would encourage the town council to adopt, but I'm going to lay that out there in a second. The second thing, which I want to stress, and then I'll leave it to them to talk and the town council, is as part of that model, the very first step would be to step back and identify these thresholds, which are essentially what are the key issues that we're trying to track that we want to make sure we don't want to have happen. And that, for example, are, I think, some of the kinds of things that we talked about in the earlier presentation. We don't want to see the marshes die. So what are the thresholds? What do we need to do to make sure that we're monitoring, tracking, and understanding when they're at risk? Or we don't want to see, groundwater salinity change to where our trees are impacted. So I think the first step that they're describing is an effort that would have them over the next couple months getting. Well, the one thing that we've missed so far is that we've been basically telling our residents what they ought to be concerned about and thinking about on sea level change. What we haven't done is gone out to our residents and said, and our stakeholders, our businesses, and said, okay, what are you concerned about? Are you concerned about the natural environment? Are you concerned about your property values? Are you concerned about drainage? Are you concerned about transportation? So what they're recommending are a couple different approaches that would entail going out over the next few months, doing some focus groups, getting some input from our residents, our stakeholders, having that result in some sort of a survey, which ultimately then could be combined with all of the work. And what I'd like to see is that the result of that brought back both to the KICA board, to the KICA board and to the town council in the November timeframe. And in so doing that, this council would have the opportunity to basically put its imprint on that first stage of the adaptive model, and really then put a new town council in a position to move to the next step. So what you've got there is their recommendation, a couple options. What you've heard from me is, because I feel strongly on this, is my perception that I think what they're recommending here makes sense. I'd like to see them actually do this, but my sense from all of my conversations is that for them to do that, they need to know that the KICA board and the town council are supportive and would like to see them spend the time, resources, and work to take on that project. Again, we'll then ask any of them to, at this point, take over, fill in the holes of what I have not described fully or correctly, and and help the town council understand where you think you would like to head. Lucas, you're not shy. Go ahead. We can't hear you, Lucas.
Lucas, you're on mute.
Lucas, you're still on mute. Yeah. There
So-
you go.
I was saying I'd like to speak to a point that Dan made earlier about we've got all these monitoring efforts going on right now. We've got groundwater. We've got a marsh vulnerability study going on. We've got tide gauges deployed. We've got weather stations on the island. So when does the point come where we actually start using that information? I think that's what this whole idea is doing. The first step is gathering what are the concerns of the community, what are those thresholds, and then we use the data that we've been collecting to explain when we're approaching one of those thresholds. What decisions do we need to make to fix a drainage issue that is causing fresh water to be pumped into a tidal creek that before was had a higher salinity? How do we find issues around the community that we might not know about yet that we can help solve just by understanding how, say, tides and groundwater, what is their mutual reaction to each other? So I think that's what the plan is really about, and definitely getting started is it's all community engagement at the very beginning.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that my role here is not as content expert. I'm the facilitator of the group. Maybe some of you don't know, but I'm a trained facilitator. And so my role has been to try to figure out how to take the content that the group has worked on and these goals that they have and figure out how do we take it out to the community. So these thresholds are basically values that the community holds. How do we get that back from the community into a form so that we, the town council, KICA, can use that to form these thresholds, to form a plan, to use it, as we've sort of outlined here, to use it for the future, to show people what is Kiawah about? Are we prepared to look forward, or are we sort of hiding our head and saying sea level rise is not going to impact us? The one thing I was really impressed about here is that in this plan, we're talking about not things that are sort of incredibly solid, so that there may be plans, response plans that are developed by staff that say, yes, if this happens, we know we have to do this. But there also are plans that might have to be developed that say, maybe we don't have to do anything about that. And maybe in 5 years, we have to do something about that. Or as Jim has pointed out, maybe there's new technology that comes along. So there's a lot of flexibility here. And I think that's really valuable. And maybe people don't understand that totally.
Yeah. Hey, Kathy, I have a question for you, if I may.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was interested in both what I'll call your recommendation, option 1, and option 2. Option 2 fascinated me a little bit, only in the sense that I was wondering if you went out there with a skeleton, let's call it, would you get, and you've obviously thought about this, would you get better input from the community than if you simply went out with more of a blank sheet and said, what do you think? I'm just wondering about, obviously you've recommended 1, but why is 1 better than 2? I sort of was enthralled by option 2 a little bit.
So we had a lot of discussion about that, and Lucas and Jim and Dave, jump in here on that. But the thought is that you're not just saying to people, well, what are your concerns? You're actually giving them, the thought would be in a group, in a facilitated group, you would say to them, it would concern me if this happened because X, Y, and Z. And so you would give them an idea like that. There's a big difference when you ask a homeowner, a property owner, that kind of question, versus if you ask a staff member who doesn't live on Kiawah, who has the technical knowledge, that same kind of question. And that was why we ended up with asking homeowners that question first. That obviously takes a lot of prep and a lot of bringing them along. I think in our discussions and in the listening to people talk in various environments, I've heard an incredible amount of expertise expressed, not just in the environmental committee and in the Sea Level Rise committee. I sat in on many of their meetings and listened to the content. There's a lot of expertise out there. So I think those kinds of individuals could help jumpstart that discussion. They already have some ideas. And these are homeowners who have a stake in what that end result is. That's different than a staff member has.
Okay. Well, that answers my question a little bit, because I think you have to seed them a little bit.
Yeah, you do.
In order to get real value out of it, or they'll be all over the map.
No, you obviously do. And that's why you need trained facilitators. So John and Dave and I met with the Sea Grant people to talk about that very issue. How could we get, that process facilitated? You're not just going to go in there and say, all right, so write down your best 10 answers.
Right,
we really need to have people who are trained to be able to talk with them.
I comment on that, just going back to the report that we sent in. We were suggesting an option one that in this prep work that Kathy's talking about, that you ask the participants to consider impacts on public infrastructure, which included stormwater management, road accessibility, community amenities, on private property, which included residence protection, landscaping resilience, property values, and the environment, which include the beach, the marsh, and the forest. So we are talking about providing some guidance instead of a free-for-all, even in option one.
Right.
In option two, in order to save time and effort, and maybe with COVID, I don't know, you sacrifice a little bit of that by starting out with more structure to begin with, and then you get community input with a more structured start.
Yeah.
And I know Jim and I have talked about this, and I've talked to John Leffler also. I mean, if my own preference is kind of a made up, hybrid A1-2, because and partly for two reasons. One, I'm more focused on getting it done by November. I mean, I want a good product, but I do think for a variety of reasons, if we're going to do this, this town council needs to see and have the ability to deal with the outcomes of that first stage. And that needs to be done by November. And I have some serious concerns about whether the full-blown A approach can be done in that time frame, particularly with some of the challenges of COVID. So to me, maybe it's a little over-engineered, but there are some important things there. So I would focus more on saying, do we all agree that whatever we get has to have stakeholder input? It has got to have input that reflects the views of our property owners, our key businesses on the island, that it needs to, in one way or another, tap into that. How they choose to do it, I'm not going to re-engineer that, so long as they can meet a time frame that this town council and the KICA board can see something in the latter part of this year that is a finished outcome of that first stage.
So your feeling is we've got to get the boat in the water by November, or it's not going to be very successful.
I think, yeah, and I have different reasons for that, partly because I'm still going to be in the boat in November, and I'd like to be in the boat when this comes in.
Okay.
Yeah, I got to say, I have a little bit of concern because we're talking about having, we said 48 was the number of people in a room. I don't know whether we could get 48 people to come together. We had originally talked about doing it at the new conference center.
And I think you can redo the
people to commit to that.
Yeah, I think you're going to have to moderate the approach. I mean, the answer is no,
Yeah.
you're not going to get 48, but I think you can conclude you don't need 48 and you can still get the input a different way.
Well, I would just reinforce what Craig is saying about, you know, the best structure we can do to get the job done by the end of the year, because it's really critical while we've got the momentum that we've got on sea level rise, that we get a process of moving forward institutionalized. And I think that's a first key step to institutionalizing dealing with sea level rise in a sensible, effective way on out into the future.
I guess my question would be, what would the council be looking for exactly? Is this just going to be, you want the thresholds that we gather from residents? Is that what needs to be turned
No.
November?
That's what I was gonna say, that's what I would be looking for, but I'd want to hear from the other council members.
Well, I think the value in this whole process is that we have an iterative process. If we remember the issues that came up when we talked about the road and redoing the road, and there was a question, are we going to do the additional level that's given in the sea level rise recommendations, or are we just going to do what we had planned normally? The thing about this process that I like, and I don't know, I'll wait till later on what I would recommend, is the fact that you can make management decisions now on these triggers, but you don't have to implement it immediately. You can delay and go forward, and then hopefully something else might be developed by the time you implement that you can use, some technology or some way of monitoring the flow of the water. I think that you must have done a lot on this before we got to the COVID-19 period, didn't you? I know you've been working on this for a long time.
Well, I've been working on the strategy of, like I have a whole rundown about what we would do with the people in the room, what the structure would look like, how we would ask questions. We have a list of people we might ask to come, so I got pretty far on that, but I don't know how far along. And I also got thinking about what a survey might look like of residents. So I got pretty far on that. I don't think that those are the meaty issues. I think Lucas's question is the key one here. What is it that the council would want to see by November so that we could make sure that whatever is produced answers that question? What is that question? Is it the end of phase 1 that says, here are the thresholds? That's sort of what we laid out. And that part of the process, how long did we say phase 1 was going to take us? I think it was 6 months, right?
Yeah, I would elaborate just a little bit on that if I could. Then that,
go ahead. Thank you.
We've been working a lot. We've had a lot of ideas and stuff, but this phase 1 threshold identification has kind of been the holdup for us, because we really didn't want to just jam it down people's throats. We wanted to make sure that the community was on board before we went on to the other steps. It's my belief that once we have the community involvement part, phase 1 done, and we're pulling to focus the thresholds that the community is behind, we want to pay attention to, that the next steps will move pretty quickly because a lot of it will involve existing staff on the town and existing staff on Kika. And if there's a reasonable priority, not absolute priority on it, I think that the staff can move the rest of the stuff pretty rapidly during the next year. That's my view. I don't know what other members of our group have to say about that, but.
So Jim, what you're saying is we need, so we've presented this as a joint community effort.
Yes.
It's an effort between Kika, the town council, the community members. It involves community member input, generating thresholds that's worked on by staff who have expertise.
Exactly. And consultants, maybe.
And consultants, okay. So we have lots of moving parts.
Right.
Yeah.
So Kathy, if that's true, you have one advantage right now. Everybody's kind of locked down. So they actually can focus more than they do sometimes. I'm a little concerned about your issue of if you have to do it by putting 48 people in a room, we're going to run into some real problems.
No, I don't think that's feasible.
Yeah.
In fact, Lucas and I were talking back and forth a little bit about this earlier yesterday. And, my best estimate, we couldn't maybe even think about doing something like that, posing it until January,
right.
If then. And Craig, your time frame is a little bit different.
Yeah. Could you go to more of an online survey of some kind?
Yeah, I mean, that's possible. I had proposed something like that.
Can I ask you something, Kathy? I'm sort of, I was always a little bit with Craig's version of if you're given two options, let's not choose either of those because we want to be difficult, let's just choose option 1A. But let me explain here what I'm thinking. I think the original plan of getting two workshops of 48 or so people together, that sounds like a great idea. That just went out of the way. That went by the wayside in early March when this virus hit. So that's not going to work. I'm wondering whether the approach would not be to have staff start like forthwith developing their ideas or possible ideas for these thresholds, and then to take those as developed by staff and integrate them in a workshop or survey online or some other way. I think wouldn't we get more feedback and reaction by chosen property owners to something they actually see in front of them rather than asking them in an online forum to start with a clean slate? I just think that might be difficult.
Well, that's kind of option 2, I think.
Yeah.
That's you looked at the option clause. Yeah, that's kind of number 2-ish.
Yeah, it's possible that we might be able to do some combination of jump starting with staff expertise with some kind of Zoom kind of thing with a select number of people,
Right.
develop a survey out of that that's broader to the community.
Yeah.
I think that again, we want to preserve the integrity of developing thresholds that are the values of the community. And so we want to figure out, and I have to think a little bit more about that, how to get those value statements in there. And I'm not saying that staff can't have values of the community, but there is something different about when you own your property and you live here and you see it every day that's different, I think.
Right, that makes sense.
So we just I have to think a little more about how that could be done, but
I'm struggling a little bit with Craig's timeframe.
Well, I guess it depends on what you're expecting in November. Let's get back to that. Lucas asked the most important question here.
As a council member, I would expect to have thresholds identified, thresholds and trigger points, and be able to relate it directly to the whole sea level rise proposal.
I like the way that the discussion's going, because I'm afraid that COVID-19 is going to be with us for months and months and months, and that if we don't find a way like you're talking about to move forward now, we're going to just lose all steam.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have to consider COVID-19 is part of our life right now and go ahead with business.
Well,
So let me
try this. Let me just throw it back at all of those of you, Lucas, all of you who've done all the work. If you could wave your magic wand and just compel council to today declare this is what we're going to do because that's what you want, therefore we're going to do that. What would that be? What do you, let me throw this around, what do you think we should now decide and do so we keep the momentum going and so on and so forth? You've done the work, we haven't.
Mhm. I think the ask for thresholds by November is a fair one. I think with option 2, we definitely could have thresholds identified by the November timeline. Where it gets, where I foresee there being a lag is going to be getting with staff, getting their input on how, okay, well, now we have to decipher this threshold because I imagine with community input, we may get things that we have to classify in one issue or another, right? It's not going to be a clean cut. I'm worried about salinity. It's going to be, I'm worried about the plantings in my yard. Well, then
the language.
yeah, is that
Right.
issue related to groundwater salinity, or is it related to the water table, or is it related to something like tides? And then the question then is, well, which entity is going to be ultimately responsible for handling that solution, right?
But that latter question, Lucas, comes, next year or the year after. I mean, that's the question that flows out of the thresholds is, now that I know that one of my thresholds involves the health of the vegetation in the marsh, I'm making that up.
Mm-hmm.
Then you're going to the next stage next year of, well, what are the drivers, what are the triggers, what are the drivers? Is that a salinity issue? Is that a tide issue? What are the ways that we measure that? But to me, as I understand your model for the thresholds, you're stopping short of that. I mean, you're identifying the higher level issue.
Right.
And I would, from my standpoint, love it if you could get to the threshold issue resolved by November.
November.
But I want to ask the council members, let me first summarize by the fact that we're right now way down in the weeds, discussing how we would do all of this. Am I correct then in assuming that there is in fact support or no objection to the overall model that this group has created, of at least trying to move forward with this concept of identifying thresholds and so on, that there is comfort with this group, along with our staff members that share these same responsibilities, of this group taking on the lead here over the next few months in helping driving this next step forward. And that if in fact you're comfortable with trying to get at least the thresholds figured out by November, letting them then have the great debate about what they need to sacrifice in the way of sophistication in order to just get it done.
Yeah, because the thing I was going to say, Craig, is that's exactly the point I was going to go to. I think our group has struggled with the fact that, as you know, we don't have a home, we don't have a validation. And I think this is an opportunity for a joint task force that between the town council and Kika, with the membership added that you deem necessary to move forward with implementing this.
Yeah, and I would only add in how you get there, and this is just is I would only encourage you to sacrifice the perfect for the good.
Well, that's very obvious right now.
That's reality.
I am very adaptable with those
Let me hear
things.
let me hear from the other council members again where you're at.
I just have one more thing. I agree we're going to go for the trigger points and the thresholds. And the way you get them is up to you. You know what you can accomplish. I have no idea whether 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 is the best way. But I can just tell you, here's what I think as a council member I would like to see.
Okay. Next.
I'll speak. I think this is a good approach. I think the mayor has presented something that's critical, which is let's get the boat in the water if we can by November. In order to do that, I think you guys can figure out, you're going to end up probably somewhere between 1 and 2. We may have to Zoom people. We may not be able to get them in a room. We may have to do some work like that, but you guys can figure that out. In terms of support for this, and Jim, to your point, getting the thing moving is terribly critical. So I'm all in favor of that. I think you're going to end up somewhere between 1 and 2, which is great. Fine.
Klaus?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think the difference between 1 and 2 is really goes to, you know, notions of what might be perfect versus very good. And I just don't think it's relevant. I think you just have to be pragmatic about it.
Chris?
I have nothing to add. I have no objections. I support what's being discussed. No other comments.
Stephanie, like all things, we come up with this stuff that needs to get done, and then we walk back and drop it in your lap. With respect to you and Jim and others on your staff who are also involved in supporting this, any comments or any concerns?
No, I don't have any. We just need the direction, because whatever, you know, to do the thresholds and not have to do the triggers, I think it's fine. This committee, I believe, probably already have some ideas in terms of some thresholds. So I think getting this done by the November date doesn't seem like a leap for staff here. And then from there will be the next step, which will be next year. So I don't have any heartburn over it.
And I know that in all of our discussions, at the end of the day, I think that Kika and the Conservancy and the town specifically think that if we are actually over the long term going to successfully address what does or does not develop from sea level rise, we need to do that in tandem and in sync. So does this, Lucas, I guess since you're the actual Kika employee, does this give you enough direction and feedback in terms of where the town is for you to now engage? I know you've already had conversations with Kika to talk with them and get them equally aligned with wherever we think we're headed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's enough direction. If there's a point of contact at the town that I need to know of to get this group started, this joint task force, then that would be, you know, I guess that would be the last bit of information I would need.
So who can I ask? I know I'm all about process. I'm sorry, but who is the person who's pulling us together? Who is the person who's leading us down here? Because that's one of the things that we need direction. You know, who's the head of us right now?
I think that conversation's, well, I might ask you a question who you want that to be, but I think we probably need to have that conversation first with the community association also.
Okay.
To see what our options are.
And then will you let the group of us know?
Sure. Yeah. Or Diana will, somebody will.
Somebody will.
It helps us get our work done.
Okay. Does this to the group, does this satisfy the feedback and enough direction that you hoped for out of this discussion?
Yeah, it's actually it's better than I thought.
Okay.
I thought maybe we were looking at not starting anything till January, so I'm just going to dust off my stuff and figure out how to change up a little bit.
Oh, ye of little faith.
No, well, I'm always glad to be smiling at the end of a conversation.
All right, we're going to move on to our next agenda item. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to new business, item A, which is to consider the approval of a contract for janitorial services, and which we, prior to this meeting, had a Ways and Means committee to discuss. So can I have a motion to award a bid to Jan Pro Cleaning Systems for and this would be, Stephanie, help me, an amount not to exceed $1,478 per month for cleaning services for a 1-year contract that has 2-year extensions. Is that what was recommended by Ways and Means?
Yes, with the addition of the initial deep clean cost of $395.
Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any discussion?
No.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Dorota, are you going to introduce this next item?
Yes, yes, sir. I'll be quick. We have a couple of policies that have been discussed and part of the budget process, or actually one of them was discussed last month with the state accommodation tax approval. So what I'm just recommending is to formalize them and add them to our accounting manual. And just very quick, so 2 of those policies are to establish an emergency fund and a capital improvement fund. So it's a brief history in during the budget work for year 2019. It was recommended by and approved pretty much by the town council then to create a capital fund and emergency at that time transfer to start up the fund, transfer $1 million to a capital fund and 20% from the revenues derived from hospitality tax and local accommodation tax. And we did that. And we did this also last year. And right now, like I said, it's just pretty much formalizing those 2 policies in our accounting manual. Another one is the one that we just discussed last month that was pretty much proposed by Mr. Wydock for the state accommodation tax. The state accommodation funding is pretty much regulated by the state law, but one of the items is the part of the funds that are spent on tourism-related expenditure are pretty much up to town council decision. And this year we ran into a situation where we actually collected less than we allocated or approved last year for disbursement. So going forward, what we're proposing to do is once the allocation is approved, first it's of course recommended by the State Accommodation Tax Committee, then it's going through Ways and Means, and then finally approved by Town Council. We arrived with, and what we're going to disperse is going to be the amount equal to this percentage up to the funds we actually collect in that quarter, because those funds are received quarterly. That way we will not run into a situation like this year. We have paid out one of our applicants the full amount back in December, not knowing that we may actually end up in a shortfall in that fund. So pretty much this is just those couple of items that I would like for you to consider to approve to be an add in a formal policy going forward.
And in both cases, do you need us to actually approve this? I mean, we've discussed in other forums, both the creation of the formula and the creation of the reserve account. So
I think as an add to the accounting manual, the policy, the accounting manual and policies was actually approved by town council when I did it in 2017. So this is in addition to, or
so we need to approve it, actually adding it to it.
update, yeah, that update to that accounting manual.
And Chris, is the language in here that's been added in to deal with the accommodations tax issue? Are you comfortable it nails it specifically what it is that we approved earlier and what we've described to the state tax committee?
Yes, I looked at it earlier. I don't have it in front of me because I've been kicked out of my office today, but my memory, having looked at it over the weekend, is it was sufficient.
Okay.
It's a good idea, Chris. It's a very good idea.
So Dorota, you ready for motion?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Does anybody want to make a motion to, I guess we need a motion to amend the finance and accounting manual to add the two provisions as outlined in the discussion?
So moved.
Second.
Any other questions or discussion?
The only comment I've got, Mr. Mayor, is before we approve that, do we need to address Wendy Kulik's question regarding a double signature, or is that really already taken care of?
Let's go ahead and approve this, and then this is the time to go ahead and raise the question, because I've already grilled Dorota on this question. I thought it was a great question, so I've already grilled her on that. So first of all, why don't we on this? We've got a motion second. All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Chris, do you want to, or Stephanie, you want to describe? We'll go ahead and answer Wendy's question, since I thought it was a good question.
Oh, yeah, Chris, because I don't have that question in front of me.
Well, I'm looking at her email. She's asking, and if I'll just read it. With this in mind, do I read the backup material to the agenda correctly in the revised finance department's accounting policies and procedures that the mayor's limit on charges to credit cards is $50,000 and the mayor pro tem's limit is $39,500? I do think she reads that correctly. That's certainly how I read it.
That is correct.
Also, there does, and this is the heart of her question, there doesn't seem to be any sign off required to authorize any credit card charges before they are made. What about authorization with payment is due? There doesn't seem to be any oversight. And her real question is, suggestion is to require two signatures approving charges to town credit cards before charges are made. And I think that gets to the heart of her question. I think it's a control mechanism, and I too thought it was a good question.
Yeah, and maybe, of course, obviously we're not there to have her, but I thought her concern and question were primarily around the $50,000 authorization, because I sign off, we have sign offs, I sign off on the town administrators. The lack of a sign off on your $39,500 and my $50,000 line of credit, this is just a credit card. Our actual spending authority does not come anywhere close to that. Dorota, I asked you that question in follow up. You want to go ahead and address?
Yes, those two cards with those high limits are pretty much emergency cards. We've only used them just, a couple of times for evacuation, pretty much. They're hardly used. As far as the other cards that staff has, it's like the mayor mentioned, the mayor sees or signs up on Stephanie's or the town administrator card. And he also signs up on his card. All other cards are pretty much, the process is that accountant, our staff accountant, she reconciles all the backup to the statements. She prints the statements, distributes the statements to the card users, reconciles the cards. Then I review them for coding and those charges, and then Stephanie reviews them and approves them. So actually there's 3 people, you know, with our small staff, there's 3 people that are involved in the scrutinizing the credit card charges. As far as pre-authorization, there is usually there is either an email or purchase order that Stephanie approves for someone to actually go ahead and make a purchase. So it's not like people go on their own and use the credit card. So I think, like I said, like I mentioned, given our small staff, we do have an accountant and manager, and the mayor usually sees all the charges. So I think it's pretty transparent. And you know,
but theoretically, as Mayor Pro Tem today, I've got a credit card. It's been locked in a safe since the day I've got it. I've never touched the darn thing. But I could theoretically go out and charge $5,000. And the only time the town would understand that I've done that is when the statement comes to you. Is that correct?
That is correct. So, and then we require that you submit your receipt to that. Well, we don't have, because like I said, for staff to use the cards, there is a pre-approval process that the Stephanie approves that, like either through the email or the PO if someone does it. For those 2 cards, there is really, since they not really use, Stephanie will, usually you wouldn't go ask her if you can approve it. You would just make a charge and then submit the receipt with.
Dorotha, the reason that there's no pre-approval needed for those cards is not, with respect, it's not because they're rarely used, but it is because of their emergency function. It's not realistic. I mean, I think ordinarily some kind of pre-approval is a good idea, as there is for staff, but given that these 2 cards, I mean, I didn't even know about this, but given that they are there for use in emergency, requiring a pre-sign off, I think just defeats the purpose.
Right. I would agree with that. I mean, in the hands of the mayor and the mayor pro tem, we've got to assume they have reasonable responsibility and are only going to use it in an emergency. And there isn't probably going to be anybody else around when they need to get that done, whatever that is.
That's true.
And if I can add, and I'm sorry, I didn't see Wendy's question. I think she didn't email it to me, so I wasn't aware of the question. But in regards to even for emergency purposes, it is typically always pre-authorized anyways, because when we go ahead, and Dorota is normally used to book and hold the rooms.
Yeah.
And so all of that is done in advance. And so, for instance, the last storm, we may have went to the mayor and said, okay, we're booking this many rooms, we put it on your card. And once we get to our destination, then we're using the card. So we are aware in terms of there is a level of pre-authorization, but to your point, Chris, no, if for some reason the card is used, you use your card because you have a business lunch meeting, you take your card, you use it. Krista sends me a copy. I get a copy of the credit card statement. I then review it. I then code it. I sign it and initial it, and then I give it to the mayor to sign and initial. So it will still have 2 signatures on that card. Yeah. But it's just like if I was to use my card because I'm having a lunch meeting, I'm not going to get it pre-authorized by the mayor, but I will have the receipt and then he will sign off on it. I sign it and he signs off on it.
Yeah, I think people
But
need
we
to
do have checks and balances in here.
We do.
Yes.
Yeah.
And also
I'm sorry, I was going to say, I think people need to recognize, I think Wendy's question is a good one. But to recognize that the limit on the card is not actually what our spending authority is in the town. I mean, mine is $5,000. So even though there's a $50,000 limit on the card, anything I spend over $5,000 has got to have 2 sign-offs, or I can get up to 5,000 after that. 2 people, another council member has to sign off on it. So it's not as if we have a $50,000, and that is there for the purpose of an emergency where, you know, we all of a sudden we're sitting at a, you know, off island because the island's been evacuated and we have no access to checks, cash, and we're up in Augusta and have to authorize some contractor to start clearing the road on Kiawah, for example. Although most of that is billed, there are some things that they need a credit card. So that's what that's used for.
And I
But I
also,
think it's a good question. And then I did ask Dorota the question of, well, is there a way to only make that credit limit apply when in the case of when a emergency has been called? But I think Dorota's view was there were enough checks and balances now.
in fact, one other thing, with regards to our emergency preparedness manual, council signed off, the mayor has authorization to spend up to $150,000 during emergency purposes without going to council.
And I just want to add one more thing, that our credit card use is also subject to our procurement. So even though someone has a card, but if they're not authorized to make purchases like staff normally, that's why there has to be an approval. If it's in a budget, then, you know, for supplies or something, we don't go for, but it has to follow our procurement process, the credit card use.
I mean, I think, you know, two things. One, I think it's a fair question. I also think we spent enough time on it. I think in any business, municipal or otherwise corporate environment, all you can do is have the checks and balances in place so that fraudulent or unauthorized spending gets caught as soon as possible and cannot be swept under the carpet for a year or two.
Sure.
If you give someone a credit card, which many people have, you will run the remote risk that that person goes on a spending spree. Not much you can do about it. He or she will get caught very quickly. That's the checks and balances we can have in place. If you absolutely don't want that, then I think we have to go to a cash kind of deal or something. So I'm not sure. While it's a fair question, I'm not sure it's really operational in our context.
All right, any other questions? I think we've addressed the question. All right, let's move then to new business, our last item C, to consider approval of proposed changes to the short-term rental ordinance. Stephanie, that's your item.
Yes, just wanted to bring to your information that you have is that over the, I guess, last 6 months now that we've had the short-term rental ordinance in place, for the most part, is doing what we need to do. It works great with our short-term rental compliance clerk, Jan Fox, and then we have the evening short-term rental code enforcement officers is doing a great job. In working through our amended short-term rental ordinance, we realized that there were some things that we need to do. So this really is a cleanup. This can come back to us in 6 months again with another cleanup. But one of the things that we realized is that, as you'll see on your page 3, is the first cleanup, which is owners that rent their property separate from, if they have a property management company and they rent their property separate from the property management company, that gross receipts that they generate has to be reported somehow. A lot of owners didn't realize that, or they thought maybe their property management companies were reporting that. So what we wanted to do and make clear is that if you generate additional gross revenue outside of your property management company through a home share platform or some other platform, that gross receipt has to be reported in either one or two ways. You can get your, if you have a property management company, you have a business license number. So you can get that number from your property manager and add that additional income onto your current license, or your property manager can do that for you. But what we're hearing from the property managers is that it might be for accounting purposes. They don't want to get into having to report revenue that they're not generating on behalf of the owner, or the owner will have to get a separate license. They're not paying for the rental application fee, I believe. Is that correct, Dorota? But what I believe,
that's correct. Sorry.
Yeah, that's all right. So only thing they're paying for is just the gross receipts that they generate, but they will have to have a separate license. So we've made that clear on the on the amendment. Is there any questions to that before I move to the next change? No? Okay. And then the other change really had to do with code enforcement efforts that's found on page 9. And a lot of this dealt with, you can probably see, if you were coming to the office, Jan has thick stacks of violations that we've seen because of bikes. The way that the ordinance was originally, or that we put in, basically stated that bicycles or beach gear should not be visible from the street, side, or adjoining properties. We were only enforcing that at night to say that it cannot be left out overnight. But we had property owners who's using our, which is great, they're using our short-term rental compliance email address or hotline number, and they're reporting short-term rental properties because at 6 o'clock or 5 o'clock, they're calling us and saying bikes are out in the front yard. And we're saying, well, it's okay. But if you read the letter of the law based on our ordinance, it was maybe confusing. So what we're doing is we're cleaning that up. And Joe helped us with this, all of this changes, is that we specified from dusk or from dawn to dusk. So now we should make it so that it's clear for our nighttime code enforcement, as well as hopefully for the property management companies when they're relaying the information back to the renters that their bikes need to be stored from after dusk.
Dusk to dawn.
Dusk to
Dusk
dawn.
to dawn.
Dusk to dawn,
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Yeah,
Dusk
dusk
to
to
dawn.
dawn. That their bikes, it says dusk to dawn here, that their bikes and beach gear needs to be stored away. So we've added that information. And then we've also put in, which this could be something that we need to discuss, which is a provision H that would require an owner. So if an owner decided to stay in their property, which is under a short-term rental program for the month or for the weekend, but they have bikes left out overnight that's visible from the side property or street, we're stating that they fall under this requirement because we are getting calls from people complaining and we don't know. When we go by, the only thing that we know is that property's under a short-term rental program. What happened?
That's a problem though, Stephanie, right?
Well, it's a problem because what happens is that
Because now the next, Joe Blow, who owns a short-term rental property, which is using himself on number 10 Eugenia, can get dinged for leaving his bikes out, whereas Joe Schmo, who owns a property that he doesn't rent on number 12 Eugenia and does the exact same thing, is immune because we are not. I don't think it says anywhere that owners who are not in a short-term rental pool fall under the same rules, right?
Right.
I don't think we can do that.
You got
do-
a problem with enforcement though, don't you?
Yeah, it's an enforcement issue. So what happens is that we then contact the property owner or management company the next day, and then all of a sudden we find out that it's the owner. And so we have not, of course, issued any tickets. This is just warning. So we're letting the owners know that we have an ordinance. Their property technically falls, their property is under the short-term rental program, and therefore they have to comply with the short-term rental ordinance.
Right, but I mean, I go back to what I just said. I think that's fundamentally unfair. I mean, we are enforcing this on renters, and I think there's a very good reason for it. But can we really tell an owner, you're in your own house, which you also happen to rent, but you're in your own house and you're doing something that the guy who's your neighbor, who doesn't rent, he does the exact same thing, and you can be cited for it, and the other guy cannot. I got an issue with that.
I'm not sure what you're saying. Both could be cited for it.
Okay, how does, that was a discussion that came up a while ago, and I think I asked you, and I never really understood it. I own my house on Flyway, and I don't rent, right?
That's different.
Under what code can I be held to task for leaving the bikes out or doing stuff like that?
That's not under ours. So our ordinance only relates to if your property's in short-term rental. So if you're a property owner and your property's not under short-term rental, that may fall under, if Kika has anything related to that, which I don't believe.
Which it doesn't, I checked.
I was gonna say, I don't think they
Not
do.
correct.
But as of right now, so no, if, as an owner, no, only thing that potentially.
Okay, so then, sorry to interrupt, but that's just to
Right,
clarify what I was saying. So we have two owners in houses right next to each other. One has a home in the rental property pool.
Right.
The other one does not. One leaves his bike out, the other one,
Right.
I mean, don't we all have a problem with that?
Well, that's for you guys' discussion, but in terms of enforcement standpoint, we're not looking at who necessarily, if it's the owner versus the renter, we're looking at that their home is listed under short-term rental, and for us to be able to enforce the regulations under short-term rental and not pick and choose between the owners there or the renters there. We're looking at it as.
Klaus, question for you. Why would an owner who owns a house and has a bike probably in the basement, why would an owner leave a bike out at night?
He forgot. He forgot or did something.
Yeah.
I mean, that's going to come back to bite us. There will be endless. I mean, it just strikes me as fundamentally unfair, right? Two guys right next to each other, same size houses on the street. One guy rents his house 3 months of the year and otherwise occupies it himself. And I did check. Kika does not have anything regarding bicycles. It's not in the Kika rule.
Yeah, for owners.
It just, I mean, that rubs me the wrong way. I mean, that just seems really strange.
Stephanie, can I ask you a question about villas? If there are 4 villas in one building and there's bikes out in front where they shouldn't be, they're not in the bike racks, how does the officer know who to give a ticket to?
I think Jan, what she's doing is she's taking a picture, she's contacting Jan, are you there? I think she's contacting the regime, but I'm not.
Okay.
That would be the, I'll have to get back with you. I know that for one, we reached out to the regime and we asked them to please send out an email letting people know that they have a short-term rental, that they need to store their bikes in an appropriate place.
Oh, that's great.
We don't know who the specific, where they're renting from. So we're reaching out to the regimes.
That's a very smart way to do it.
Klaus, to answer your question, I'm not bothered by it. I think if the person who's renting his home gets a warning violation that says the bicycle needs to be put away, I would hope he puts it away. And unless this becomes a big issue, that it's a repeat issue, then I think that's the easier way to handle it, because asking the code enforcement officer to determine whether the guy who left his bike out, the guy who left his bike out is an owner or simply a renter, I think you're putting an undue burden on that guy. I don't know how
and
many.
I wouldn't want to do that. I would not want to do that, of course, Chris, but so you won't mind then getting the phone call from that owner that says, hey, look, I forgot to leave my bike out, yada, yada, yada. But may I point out that my good friend Buddy, who is next door, also had his bike out, and you're leaving him in peace. Now, how can that be?
First of all, I'm not going to field the phone call, and second of all, it goes to the court.
Okay.
And it may even go to the code enforcement officer to say, hey, look, I made a mistake. I left my bike out, and it's not. I'm an owner, and can you waive it? And what I've heard Stephanie say is,
waiving.
Yeah, they'll probably waive it. But
Except
you know what?
we're putting something into the ordinance now that makes it explicitly applicable, right? Point H.
Let me finish. The same owner, if he does it 3 and 4 times, I think we should ticket him. Yep. So, I understand a mistake. I understand the guy messes up. Now, does the guy who owns the place and doesn't rent his house, does he get away with it? Yeah. How much do you want to legislate? But to answer your question, I don't have a problem with it.
All
right. Jan, just for clarification, Ms. Conley had asked that for condos, when, of course, in the evening night patrol goes through there and the bikes are not properly placed in the bike racks, who are we contacting the next day? Is it the regime or who are you reaching out to?
Okay, if we run into any problem like that and we have quite a bit with not enough storage and that type of thing, I reach out to the regime managers. And they're able to contact the people who own the villas or send them an e-blast or something like that to remind them that if they do have rentals, that it's a requirement. Because at this point, we haven't issued any tickets.
And Jan, say that again. I was just going to ask that question. My understanding, despite all of the jabber I see, nobody on this island last year or this year to this point has ever had a ticket written against them for bikes being left out. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
Yeah, no tickets have been, only friendly warnings and trying to educate everybody about the ordinance.
And so the thrust of this change is in fact to soften the ordinance, because today on paper, it is a 24/7 ordinance. And what we're saying is, nah, you know, during the day, people are in and out, they're moving stuff. We're not going to be running around.
Right.
Telling people, pick up your bike during the day, but at night, that's when we're really looking to have the place look more like Kiawah wants to look.
Absolutely. And the biggest thing is in the evening time is the bikes and the beach stuff. We are looking for towels over railings during the day, that type of thing. So that type of stuff is still being looked at and sent as a reminder.
And am I correct or wrong that the sense I've been given is that most of the places where we have gone to somebody about bikes and given them the little flyer or the little hanger or whatever, a large number of those have been because in fact the neighboring residents are the people who have complained and asked us to take action. Is that correct or am I wrong?
It's some of it. We have gotten a lot of properties or owners who have called and asked us, but we, you know, also the evening guys are really getting
that too. Okay.
A lot of pictures. We have everything documented.
And one thing I like to add, we talked a lot about bikes and the owners, but what we've also had problems with is which the owners that have their property in the rental program, they also have to comply with is the number of vehicles parking, because what we're also seeing is that an owner would come and based on the application, maybe they're allowed to have, say, 6 vehicles and all of a sudden they have 10. And so we're also reminding them that they still fall under the ordinance and they have to comply. We're not requiring, they will be exempt from the occupancy load though. So that's not, or the maximum amount of people in their home. We're not, they're exempt from that. So that's not included in the provision.
But we're not going to ticket them, are we?
We haven't really done a lot of tickets. We've just done
Haven't
a
done
warning.
I know we've done almost no tickets.
We
But
let
I mean,
them know that, you know, if there's cars parked, for instance, they have cars parked on the street or they're on landscaped areas, we let them know that based on the ordinance, they can't have the vehicles parked in landscaped areas. Because they have more vehicles there that, you know, is allowed or can fit.
and Kika does have that rule, so.
Yeah.
Well, my view would be at this point, because I think it's the only practical application. If somebody wants to rent their house out and has a rental license, then they're going to have to follow the rental rules. We can't figure out who's there and who's. I understand your point, Klaus, but it's not. I mean, it's not manageable. So
I will take an Ambien tonight so that I can sleep with all this aggravation now. I can deal with this. I just thought it was a little odd, but I also understand, and Stephanie explained that to me last time. I understand that part of this is just an issue of what we can legislate and what we cannot, because we really, Stephanie, correct me if I'm wrong, but really do not have the ability to impose something on a homeowner who's not subject to short-term rentals. So that's a Kika, right?
Right.
Okay.
We don't have anything in our, we just don't have an ordinance that deals with that.
I'll take my Ambien later.
But Klaus, get 2 martinis would be better for you.
Well, yes, when I said Ambien, I actually meant 2 martinis.
Okay.
And I have nothing else to add in terms of the changes.
All right. Do we have a motion to approve these 2 amendments to the short-term rental policy?
I
So
so
moved.
moved.
And this is first reading, because we have to have 2 readings, so this will be first reading.
At first reading. Did I hear a motion?
So moved.
Yes.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Do I hear any more conversation? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. All right, town administrators report.
Just have one thing while Jan is here, but just want to let everyone know that we have scheduled for next Wednesday, Jan Dorota and our code enforcement staff will be meeting with the property management companies, as well as we invited the bike rental companies. And we're just doing a 6-month progress meeting to see if there's any questions or concerns that they have. We want to express to them issues that we might be seeing in the field, and also talking with the bike rental companies, because part of the problem that we're finding out is that they are dropping the bikes off maybe a day or 2 in advance. The day they're supposed to pick up the bikes, they may not pick up for 2 or 3 days. And so we're going to also talk with them to make sure they received a copy of the ordinance. So this is not new for them, but we want to make sure that we have a discussion with them. So that meeting is next week. Jan, do you want to add anything with regards to it, or are you good?
Well, we did a pretty extensive 6-month spreadsheet of the violations, and like Stephanie was saying, a majority was bikes. So that seems to be a real issue. We've been trying to work with everybody about some places don't have the storage that they need to put the bikes out of sight. So that's one of the things we want to see if we can help them, or they can help us understand, what we can do to get, this bike issue taken care of. And also, like she said, about the bike companies being on the same page and understanding the ordinance.
The one other thing, excuse me, Stephanie, for the bike companies, please remind them that they just can't drop the bikes off anywhere. If they're busy and they have a lot of bikes to deliver, they just plop them on the lawn.
Right.
Yes, we will definitely do that. I have nothing else, Mayor, to add in my report.
All right, council members, Councilman Wydick,
I have nothing.
Councilman Connolly,
No, nothing.
Councilman Prickett,
No comments, thank you.
Councilman Side.
Nothing?
I guess I appreciate hanging in there for a long 3.5 hours. And with that, I will take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
I so moved. Second.
We're adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.